28th. Oh, got it now. Good afternoon. Welcome to the March 28th Governance and Priorities Committee meeting. I'd like to first acknowledge that we are on the traditional territory of the Snaimo First Nation. Our clerk today is Ms. Sky Snellgrove. Today's Governance and Priorities Committee meeting will be held in accordance with the Community Charter and Council Procedure Bylaw 2018, number 7272. The question period sign-up sheet is on the table by the double doors to my left for the agenda items only. If during the meeting any member of the gallery has a question regarding an agenda item, please write down your name and the agenda item on the sheet. Members have been granted the authority to join meetings electronically. Please refer to the guideline sheet for reference. And today I will say that we have Councillor Brown and Councillor Turley joining us. And the first item on the agenda is deduction of late items. Ms. Snellgrove.
Thank you, Chair. For agenda item 7A, Reimagine Nanaimo, Healthy, Empowered, and Prosperous, we're replacing the PowerPoint presentation and adding a delegation from Nancy Mitchell, Newcastle Community Association. And removing agenda item 7B1, Environmental Responsibility and Environment Committee recommendations to precede Reimagine Nanaimo.
Thank you. If I could have a motion for the adoption of the agenda as amended. Moved by Mayor Krogh, seconded by Director Martman. All in favor? Or sorry, Councillor Martman. Motion carries. Motion for adoption of minutes is circulated by Councillor Hammond, seconded by Councillor Martman. All in favor? Okay. Agenda Planning, Governance and Priorities Committee. I'm not seeing Ms. Gurry, so I'm assuming Ms. Snellgrove, you will be introducing that.
Ms. Gurry is on the line now.
Oh, Ms. Gurry, sorry.
Thank you, Chair, and my apologies for being online today. The agenda planning is located in your original agenda package, and on it shows the next dates outlining the Reimagine dates set to end May the 9th, which will be your decision-making day for Reimagine, and then it will go to the council meeting under consent at the following meeting. The other items that are located on the back page to be determined, there are a couple of items that Mr. Lindsay has brought to my attention. The housing one will be brought forward possibly to a GPC in June, and the street entertainers bylaw will be brought forward to a meeting in July, a GPC meeting in July. So he has those two to be determined dates tentatively scheduled. And if there's anything else that council would like to discuss, I'm available for that as well.
Any questions, council? Seeing none, I think we're good on that. Thank you, Ms. Gurry.
Thank you.
We have no committee recommendations, and we'll go to reports. Environmental Responsibility, Environment Committee recommendations to be introduced by Mr. Lindsay.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just an information report for the committee this afternoon. As outlined in the report itself, after the last GPC meeting, staff felt that there was a number of questions and some confusion around specifically how recommendations from committees were coming forward. And in this case, it was recommendations that were made back in December at the Environment Committee, and then were subsequently given consent by Council on December 20th. So this report is just attempting to show how those individual policies were either drafted or redrafted and found their way into the plan or into the draft integrated action plan, which has not yet been shared with council. So that is attached, and again, it's simply here for information for the committee. I think going forward, and you know, I have to apologize to the committee, because I think had we had this framework that's in front of you right now in place in December, we probably could have avoided this confusion. So today, as we've mentioned at the last GPC meeting, the recommendations from the committees are now coming to you directly as a steering committee, where they'll be considered by you as the steering committee for Reimagine, for the city plan. And then all of those recommendations will come to May 9th before finally being considered by council as consent items on the May 16th. So that's the current format that we're taking. But within the case of the December items, this was before we had this. So those items proceeded directly at council, which I think created some confusion. Again, staff have attempted to outline here how we took those recommendations and how they have found their ways into the plan or plans. I'm certainly happy to answer any questions on that. And again, apologize for any confusion this is created.
Thank you. I have Director Hemmons.
Thank you, Chair.
There's Councillor, sorry.
Oh, that's okay. Not specific to the Environment Committee, I just want to make sure that I understand the process well. So all of the feedback that is coming to this committee, and I will take the example from Newcastle Neighbourhood Association this afternoon, that will be provided to Council for their consideration prior to us seeing the final draft. And we will have decision points on each of those to say, yes, we want to include that, no, we don't want to include that.
Mr. Lindsay?
That's through the chair to Councillor Hemmons. That's exactly right. So the intent is to kind of direct those inputs that we're receiving to the appropriate forum. So if we get inputs, for example, around land use or neighborhood plans, we may direct those to the April 11th GPC, where at that point the steering committee could make recommendations that would finally be considered on May the 9th. But there may be a variety of forms of input that you as council are getting directly, as staff are getting from individuals, but generally from organizations. That's how we are intending to respond to those.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, seeing no further questions, we'll move on to B,
Excuse me,
Reimagine Nanaimo.
Chair Armstrong, Councillor Turley has his hand raised.
Sorry, Councillor Turley?
Thank you, Chair. A quick question with regard to, and I apologize, I'm trying to find it on where I thought I read it earlier, and that is to, part of the recommendations were to try to convince the province to allow no more connections of natural gas to residents' homes in Nanaimo. And my question is, how, if that goes through, how is that likely to affect the money that we get as input from Fortis?
Mr. Lindsay?
I think I missed the last part of the question, but if it was, how are we getting input from Fortis on
No,
such a
it's
policy?
how would the
No,
funding from
no.
Fortis, we would lose
Oh,
funding from
sorry.
Fortis.
How do we enforce? Well, again, I might ask the committee members here who are members of the Environment Committee that can speak to this better. But in the table that's attached to the report, Councillor Turley, there is the list of the policies, and I think it's the top of page 3 was the actual policy in question, which says that council advocate to the provincial government for a moratorium on new natural gas connections. So it was not about enforcing it, but basically advocating to the province who has that authority. And then the table here outlines that it was not included in the actual city plan, which I think raised questions specifically at the last GPC meeting about why not. But here we're trying to say this is how it's being proposed to be responded to in the action plan, and the outlined, the tentative wording is proposed there in the table.
Yeah, I probably didn't clarify myself, but I understood that we're advocating to the province. But my question is, we get funding through Fortis, and I forget what it's used for now. But if we start suggesting to the corporation that we're not going to allow we don't want to have further connections, is there a rule in place that allows us to still get the funding from Fortis, or is that put that in jeopardy?
Well, through the chair, I think we'd probably have to report back to on exactly the implications of if you were successful in getting this ability to have a moratorium, first of all. But my suspicion is that you would still be eligible for those existing services in the community, right? It would just be about limiting future connections to new developments, but not about, this policy anyways doesn't speak to anything about removing existing services within the city.
Yeah, I realize that. My concern is,
We could just,
we're not going to play nice in the playground with them. Are there outs for them through excluding existing ones? I just don't think we should get into a fight with Fortis, given the amount of money we get.
thank you. Move on to our next one then, to Reimagine Nanaimo. I see no other questions. Oh, no, sorry, I do. Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Chair. Are we on this part of the, we're not, are we on this part of the meeting now? I'm a bit confused, I think.
I think we were just going over my understanding, Councillor Turley wanted to know how, if that moratorium was, even if it wasn't successful, could Fortis pull their funding? So I think we've answered that question. So now, if there's no other questions on the environmental recommendations and how we got there, I would like to move to Reimagine Nanaimo. So is yours on Reimagine Nanaimo or environment?
Still on the environment, so.
Go ahead.
No, thank you. And having been on that committee and the conversation took place, the concept here is that every time a new natural gas connection gets installed in a house, it will then be using gas until, for whatever reason, it changes. And that could be decades. So the concept here is that limiting the amount of natural gas connections will give us the ability at a later date to lower our carbon footprint, basically. I don't see the need for it to be in an action plan. I would prefer it to be in the community plan, because to me, the community plan is something that's overall arching, and that we want the province to put a moratorium on new natural gas connections. And so, because what's going to happen is, if it's in that action plan and the provincial government during the next election loses and the dinosaur party gets elected, that 2030 date could be pushed to 2040, 2060. But having it in our plan is that we will continue to advocate to the province until such time as there are a moratorium on new gas connections, which will make our place a better place to live in for our grandchildren. So that's kind of where the conversation came about. And I think the need for it to be in the plan as opposed to just the action plans at the end, which can be changed on a daily basis.
Thank you. Councillor Geselbrecht.
Thanks, Chair. Mr. Lindsay, did you have a question for the clarity for the Environment Committee on the intention of this, or was that answered?
I was just trying to respond to Councillor Turley's question, and I thought maybe if the chairs or co-chairs had anything additional to add as to why, or I think the genesis behind this motion, I think was what Councillor Bonner was speaking to. So.
Okay, yeah, I mean, to add to that, just at the committee level, we had a planner consultant from Victoria that came and presented basically the community's greenhouse gas emissions and what was the major contributors to there, and it was very clear that we won't make our goals if we don't limit natural gas, and it was very clear. And at the provincial level, there's been a lot of subsidies for natural gas, and it's been promoted that it's the cheaper option. But when you start looking at the new requirements for building efficiency, for energy efficiency in terms of insulation, what's required, the numbers now don't add up as much for that argument. And I think that there's been so much information, in terms for Fortis promoting natural gas, that the actual clarity and the reality of the situation is not very apparent to the community, and I think that it requires a lot more initiative from municipalities. And I think it's very clear that we don't have the powers ourselves to limit natural gas connection, but we can make it a policy to advocate for that. And I think that I do still strongly believe that that should be something in our official community plan if we are really going to take serious the climate emergency, if we're going to take serious taking responsibility for our greenhouse gas emissions. And maybe that's something that the committee can, this committee can revisit for more discussion at a future point. But that was a recommendation from the Environment Committee going forward, that be a point of priority for the city to advocate. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Geselbrecht. Okay, I do see no more questions this time, so we will move on to Reimagine Nanaimo Healthy, Empowered and Prosperous, to be introduced by Mr. Lindsay.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And again, as outlined here, the intent of today is to go through the next 3 policies. So we worked through the green and connected policies at your last meeting, and today we're hoping to work through the next 3 sections. So I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Bhopal Singh, who will kind of steer us through the day, but we do have a number of staff who are going to speak on the relevant sections and are available to answer questions. And again, looking for the steering committee's feedback and input, and if there's anything that you see at this point you want to recommend for changes or for it to be considered, again, appropriate to make a motion here to have that approved, but then we would be bringing those forward for the entire package back to you on your meeting on May the 9th. So hopefully that clarifies the process, but I'll turn it over to Ms. Bhopal Singh to at least get us started on the day.
Thank you, Ms. Bhopal Singh.
Good afternoon, Council. Just going to wait for the PowerPoint to be pulled up. So while we're waiting for the PowerPoint to be pulled up, I'm going to be going over with you today, responding to actually some of your questions at the last GPC, showing you how the plan is integrated with the action plans and trickles down all the way to an individual staff person. Then we'll be going through the policies and actions. There was a request for clarity around what makes a good policy, what makes a good action, so spending a few minutes on that. And then getting into the meat of today, which is going through 3 goal areas: a healthy Nanaimo, an empowered Nanaimo, and a prosperous Nanaimo. And these 3 sections could be delivered by any one of 7 different staff across all our departments. And we'll have different speakers today besides myself. And hopefully, and at the end of that, we will then go through next steps and timelines. And as with other discussions we've had with you, this is your time to have discussion with us, to ask for clarification as we move through this part of our draft city plan. So that's our agenda for today. And then wanted to show you this graphic, and you are used to seeing the wheel that we had that shows the integration of all the different city plans that went into our draft city plan. And now to show you how our city plan at the top, the draft plan that we're looking at today, how it fits in with Council's strategic plan that gets reviewed on a more frequent basis, and then also provides then guidance for decisions and actions and budget investments that the city actually takes. That feeds into the integrated action plan that we are bringing back to you in the fall, where you have the opportunity on an annual basis, and then of course starting off this fall, with what are some of the specific things you want to see happen to implement our action plan. And then showing that every year as that integrated action plan is endorsed by you and budgets committed to, how that fits with departmental work plans, and then the work of individual staff. So just so you can see the sequence of how that flows. And to the left, you'll see the monitoring strategy, and that's a really important piece for where we come back to you, ideally on an annual basis, where we've got all the information to say, this is the progress we're making towards the different goals that you set for us, and this is how effective the actions that you've invested in are. And that will allow Council to evaluate how you want to distribute your investments going forward, and whether give you the ability to measure how effective the different actions that we're taking are going. So I don't know if you've got any questions about this graphic, but it was a way of showing you visually what we're aiming to do here. Okay, everybody's good with that, through the chair? Okay. So wanted to spend just a few minutes talking about policies and actions, and this is definitely not a, it's a very nuanced piece. Language depends on the context and use of documents, but our intent here is to keep the draft city plan strategic and directional so it withstands the test of time. So it's reviewed every 5 years with a thorough review every 10, but the intention is that it sets the direction for the next 25 years and beyond. And so the language is intended to be broad, having the ability to be very directional, and then the integrated actions that come from that are intended to be specific and adjustable. So things that you can tweak and change almost on an annual basis. Not almost, on an annual basis.
Sorry, I have a question from Councillor Brown.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Not so much a question, just I've been thinking a lot since last GPC about, the information that the action plans wouldn't be coming to Council till after the adoption, and I just want to put it on the table just for full transparency. I think I'm quite uncomfortable actually reviewing city plan without the integrated action plans. I may be the only one that feels that way, but I just been thinking about it pretty deeply since 2 weeks or how many weeks it's been, and I just again just want to say full transparency. That's sort of where I'm at with that news and how it all fits together. Thanks.
And I'll just agree, I do agree with Councillor Brown as well, that I struggle with that as well. Thank you.
Okay. So our next slide here, and I'll try and address, Councillor Brown, some of the concerns that you've raised as we go through this. So you've seen this section is actually in our draft plan. It shows the integration from the Nanaimo donut to how we've gotten our draft goals, how that fits through to policy sections, and then off to the right, the integrated actions plan. And so what is a policy or strategic direction? That is what we want to do to achieve and guide our decisions and actions. What are some of the elements of a good policy? It's clear, it uses positive language, it relates to desired outcome, it's within the scope and mandate of the city. So for example, during Reimagine, we got feedback on a range of things, and some of them were clearly under the purview of the provincial or federal government. And with those, the city can advocate for those changes, but we don't have direct responsibility, funding, or mandate to achieve some of those directions that the community wants at large. But there's a lot that we do. And so our policies are aimed at looking at what's within our scope and our mandate. The policy should stand the test of time. It should be able to be delivered within the time frame of the plan. It should be based on evidence or engagement. So, for example, we have the community expressing desires for more affordable housing and protection of that. And so policies related to that and based on our evidence that, yes, affordability is a challenge based on, we have clear evidence for that in the market. That's one example. And it's also flexible enough to allow for a range of actions to implement. Now, with that, there'll be nuances where there'll be some policies we have direction from you that are more specific and may not allow flexible actions. So what is an action? It's something that can be specific to a program or project or policy direction to implement the plan. And it's things that we do to achieve our goals and desired outcomes. So what makes a good action? It's achievable in the plan lifetime. It works to achieve the goal in the policy. It's regularly evaluated and adjusted. And it's also measurable. So with that, here's an example of a policy. Continue to provide recreational facilities, services, and programs and infrastructure to meet the demands of the community as it grows. I won't read the rest of it. So you can see the language is quite broad, but it could support several actions to implement it. So an example, one very specific one, is the South Nanaimo Community Centre that Council has recently endorsed, proceeding with analysis and site selection and design. And under that particular policy, you could see that throughout the city, Council could direct us to undertake very specific actions, all of which achieve that policy. And so policy action language tends to be very, I'm going to say action-oriented, but specific, and shows clearly how it links back to the policy.
I have a question on that. Where is your timeline for that?
The timeline for achieving an action?
Yeah, like proceed with, like there should be timelines for us so that we know what is our timeline.
Right.
I mean, we can have all the actions in the world, but if there's no timeline.
Yeah, through the chair, that's an excellent point. And with the action plans, when you see them, how they're going to be broken down is into immediate, things that are going to be done within 0 to 5 years, future, 5 years and beyond, and then ongoing. So there's certain things the city does on an ongoing basis, dealing with garbage, water, sewer provision, or recreational services. And so you'll see actions organized that way. And then council has the opportunity to move things up to higher priority or to future.
Thank you.
Okay. So before I move on to our policy review section, are there any questions from council on that piece?
Councillor Hemmons?
Thanks, Chair. I have a general question as it relates, and you actually just gave me a really good way of framing it. So I'm struggling with our policies because they identify a policy, but they don't give me a policy that I can read and review and chew on. So I'm going to give you an example. So 3.1.11 says that we're going to develop a land acquisition and funding strategy to acquire sites for affordable housing. And I think that's really good. I think that's something I want to be behind. But going back to Councillor Brown's and Councillor Armstrong's comments earlier, without knowing, a land acquisition strategy could say, we don't ever want to put supportive housing in our community. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's the, what's the objective of developing a land acquisition strategy?
Right.
And when are we going to do that, and who? So maybe you could just start there. I'm having a hard time seeing, like, there's a lot of policy identification in here, but I'm not seeing where the policies are. Maybe it's the actions that I'm not quite understanding how they link.
Okay. So with I'm trying to flip to the page that the specific example you've given. I think it's
Page 94 for those that have booklets.
95, okay. Okay, so I'll work with that one as a good example. Okay, and it was C. 3.1.11. Okay. And in this case, what it's saying is that we do have a land acquisition strategy, and it's upfront saying that we will include in this, either integrated or separate, a strategy to acquire sites for affordable housing. And then council has the opportunity to, in its actions, prioritize what those look like and where. And so this is a broad policy that then allows for council on an annual or biannual basis, in partnership, as you know, we work with BC Housing, for example, to identify the criteria and what that looks like. I don't know if that helps.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
I
my
think, no,
screen's
that was
off.
my fault. I think we're maybe just envisioning it differently, and it's difficult to kind of weigh in without seeing those meatier parts of the action plans, because, you know, for example, under affordable housing, we have 29 policies. Without seeing the action plans, I don't know which are going to be prioritized, which are going to be 7 years out, which ones we're already working on and we're seeing success, and et cetera, et cetera. So I think it grows on my comments from the last GPC that having a stronger sense of how it all fits together would be beneficial for me.
Yeah, and through the chair to Councillor Hammonds, I see that this is probably a challenge that also some of our community are going to have, and it's the challenge that we have setting directional and visionary documents. The strategic plan basically sets out the framework for where we want to be. So the goals say, okay, we want to have a healthy community where everybody can afford a home. That's where we want to get to, and then it sets some broad policies for how we can get there. But then the rubber hits the road with the actions that you take on an annual basis. And just like you do currently when you are tasked with evaluating staff's proposals on different budgets, those are the actions you're taking. So the question is this document give you the ability to move towards the goals you have and the flexibility as options come up, whether it's different funding streams from government, that you can actually still achieve that. The policy is broad enough that you can take a range of actions to achieve it. I don't know if that helps a little bit.
It does, thank you. And in terms of those action plans, will council have a say in the prioritization of those? Okay, so those
Yes.
decisions are yet to be.
Yes,
Sure.
and through the chair to Councillor Hammonds, one of the things we looked at is we could put everything on the table, but then that means that that's a huge amount of time that we're juggling with you and the community as we lead up to the bylaw process. Where you have the whole point with the actions is that council absolutely gets to drive the prioritization. You have certain things that we do as a city government that you'll probably keep on going, garbage, litter, all those different pieces. But then after that, all of the different actions, much like you have those choices every year with budgets, will come to you, but it's all being very clearly tied back to the city plan. So you can see, okay, under this goal, a green Nanaimo, or maybe it's a prosperous Nanaimo, here are some specific things that we want to achieve. Now, here are a suite of different options you have to invest in, both staff time and taxpayer money, around how you want to achieve those goals. And that's where you get to prioritize. You may take something that could, 1 year, you had it 5 years out, but you have an opportunity with a big infrastructure grant, say, from the government, and you might say, okay, you know what, we're going to move this up. It's going to be an immediate priority in the next 2 to 5 years instead of 10 to 12, because we have an opportunity, and you have the ability to do that on a regular basis. And then that, in turn, pivots staff and their work plans and the work we do to implement. So that's the intention, is to show that very clear linkage, and council absolutely has the ability to direct us at each stage. Now, we'll be coming forward with what we think are a range of your priorities, and in some ways you've already given us those priorities. So for example, if I use the South End Community Centre, you've already given that some level of priority with its initial feasibility study. So we would keep that, say, okay, you've endorsed all these things. Here are some other pieces that we think you might want to consider moving up. but you can move things up or down as you choose on an annual basis. So,
Thank you. I have Councillor Bonner, then Thorpe, then Martman.
Thank you very much, and through you to staff. Going to page 95, we have two items, 3.1.9, 3.1.16. The first one is use tax revenues for short-term rental accommodations to support increased access to low-income and special needs housing. We already do that. And similar to the other one, restrict short-term rentals to maximize supply of rental units. We've already done that. So is it in here to make sure that future councils don't undo it?
it's through the chair, there will be many actions here that are carried forward from things that you've endorsed. And the important thing is you still want to put it in here so that you are setting that framework. So in a way, yes, a future council would have to amend that if it wasn't no longer supportive of that direction.
Okay, because I thought, this to me looked like a short-term item because we've already done it. And not that I'm dwelling on the gas connections, right? But I'm just trying to figure out how the process works. Is that, staff said this was a short-term thing, which is why it's in an action plan. And to me, having already done something would make it even shorter term because it's already done. So just going forward, and I'm not suggesting we're going to change things, is if we were to reword the motion of the gas connections, right? And this is theoretical, right? On that question, we're going to do it. To say that we advocate for a moratorium on gas connections until such time as the moratorium is achieved. Would that then bump it up to this level?
Through the chair, that's a great question, and I'm trying to figure out how to approach that, because the one piece about the short-term rental and the use of revenue for that is a direction of council that isn't a one-time piece. Our understanding from council is that's an ongoing direction that you've given us. With the advocate for the moratorium, that is, I guess that's come through the Environment Committee for Council to consider. I don't know that changing the wording would bump it up per se. It's the question of whether you want to keep something high level, because the overall objective with that is to get away from greenhouse gas causing fuels. That's the broad goal. And then one action is we don't control whether gas is used in our community, is to advocate for the government. So it's a specific action to achieve that. So I think where we're getting into it, and this is tricky, and I appreciate it's tricky for all of you and for our community, is that nuance between a policy and a specific action to make that happen. Because overall, what the intention of the moratorium, I think, is basically we want to get away from greenhouse gas causing fuels. And that's the broad intent. And then the moratorium can be seen as a specific action to achieve that goal. Now, I think one of the rationales, and I'm not sure if I'm going to be misquoting Duncan, is that if the provincial government advances its directions, we're going to reach that point through them anyway. And then what I'm hearing is, well, if the provincial government shifts, what then? Mm-hmm. So I'm not sure I've given you a great answer there. I'm not sure if anybody else, as I look to my right, might help out with a better answer.
Through the chair, I think the only thing I would add, and I think committee members here today have hit on a good point, is there's definitely some arguments about what could be in a policy document and what could be in action plans. And I think really at the end of the day, that's a decision for this committee and for council to ultimately make that call. I would say with respect to action plans, I think one of the things I just wanted to highlight and be clear about is quite often one of the criticisms we get about planning and planning documents is it's great, you have all these general policies and ideas about things that want to make our community successful, but it ends up not being actioned because they are not prioritized. And the thought is of having an action plan is exactly that. It stands outside of the bylaw so that it is reviewable. So one of the questions about, well, why not do it now as well? Next year, the council of the day could review the action plan and put their lens on it and decide, this year, this is going to be our priorities. and that could be done regularly. It's not a bylaw amendment, but it's something that allows us to continue on, but using this document, the city plan, as that policy framework for these are the things we're trying to achieve, but the order you achieve them in, yeah, that's going to change as we move through. And you're right, there are things in here that I guess you could check off and say, yes, we've done, but I think it would be good for, future staff or future council to look back and go, well, why are we doing these things? Because there is policy direction in your OCP about why we think these things are important to us as a community.
Okay, just one more. So I guess that tweaks to me is going forward, a couple of years down the road, there are many, 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 many policy parts in this thing, like hundreds. So how do we how does council look at them and say, okay, number C31276 didn't get done last year? Like how do we make sure that they're all being actioned on and not some are being left behind because there's hundreds of them?
Yeah, and I think that's a great point. And I think the model that is being proposed of kind of an annual or regular review of your action plans is exactly that opportunity. The opportunity to check back in. Are we meeting with these policies? Is there anything that's being left behind, so to speak? What is the time frame? Like, when do we expect to get to these things? Because I think there's often, and I'll admit one of the challenges with planning is often raising expectations for everybody in the community. But look at all this wonderful work that's going to be done, but there's no understanding of when. So I think that's where the action plans can really be successful, helping us identify what, and those priorities will evolve. Absolutely, they'll evolve. But yes, checking back in with the policy document when that work is done for sure.
Thank you. I have Councillor Thorpe, Martman, Brown, Geselbrecht.
Thank you, Chair. And I'll try to be brief because I feel we're getting bogged down here. And a couple of points, if I may. First of all, to Councillor Bonner's comment, the reality is that in future, a different council can come along and change absolutely anything that we determine here, whether it's policy, whether it's action plans, whatever. In some cases, I definitely hope they won't. There's a few cases where I absolutely hope they will, but that can happen. That's the reality.
Ditto.
As far as what we're doing today, I don't share the concerns of Councillor Brown and Councillor Armstrong regarding action plans. I see this exercise as more similar to strategic planning, which of course we've already gone through and always enjoy. We are setting a general direction. We are asking, and here's what we seem to keep forgetting, we are asking the public whether they approve of those general directions or not. And when we hear that feedback from the public, then it will be incumbent on whatever council is sitting here to decide on their priorities for specific action plans. And I look at the example on the slide that Ms. Bhopal Singh showed us, which is an easy one, regarding recreational services, a general policy, which of course I support. Specific action plans, South End Community Center, well, yes, I support that, but there might be action plans under that policy that I wouldn't support, depending on what they involve. So I think those come later, and those are up for debate for the council of the day in terms of approving them or not, and then setting their priority. So I'm quite happy to proceed with determining general policy that we can give to the public and say, are we on a track that you agree with or not, as the what's the word, Part C or Section 3 survey indicates. Do you agree, disagree? And do you have comments? That's what we want to hear about. Then based on that, at a future point in time, we can worry about then deciding action plans and priorities. That's how I see it. Others obviously don't see it the same way, but that's my view of it, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Councillor Martman.
I had 23 years experience of strategic planning and the goal setting and action plans, etc., in the corporate world. And in the corporate world, we would not move towards action plans until the strategy was actually complete, because the strategy could change. And so you might create draft action plans to support as you go along, but when the final document to the strategic plan was approved by higher up, then we created the action plans. And then I saw on the first screen where from the action plans, there was monitoring. And so I think we're getting ahead of ourselves. The city plan, the official community plan, and our plans in the corporate world would sometimes include continuing policies that we were keeping. So for instance, the short-term rentals, that just stays there, it's a good thing. So those that are good policies should stay in the strategy, because this is for the next 30 years. Very high vision, very broad language. And then when we get into the action plans is when we can get into the nitty-gritty. That's my personal experience. I don't think we need to go to action plans. We stick with policy. Thank you.
Councillor Brown?
Yeah, thanks, Madam Chair, and appreciate everybody's comments. So I really think this plan has the first two categories, the draft plan has the first two categories of what a good strategic plan should have really dialed in. It's got clear goals and it has clear priorities. I think where it gets a little messy for me is, to me, the next hierarchy and where we probably should end when I think this through is it should have a layer of strategies, and it does have some, but then there's really discrete actions mixed in there. Not all over the place, but there is. And so that's where I really start to question, okay, why did those ones make it, right? What there was and that's why, if they weren't in there, I wouldn't want to see the action plans, right? If it just went goals, priorities, strategies, period, action plans to come later, okay, that makes sense to me. But when there is discrete actions in there, mixed in, that's when then it sort of tugs at me and I say, okay, I want to see the action plans because there are some actions included in here. So that's where I'm personally really struggling with is why did some of those more discrete actions make this plan where others are being kicked to the act? There just seems to be a blending or a mixing there that I'm not sure how that filter happened, what conversations led to that, and why some have been. I would like to know why they've been elevated a little bit more to this plan rather than the other ones. And, and if it makes sense, then yes, but the way I view it right now is I'm just left to look at it and say, I think they're blended and maybe they shouldn't be. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Geselbrecht?
Thanks. Yeah, when I was reviewing through this, I kind of had a similar experience, like with this discussion of policies and actions. There was a few sections where it started to get quite specific, and I can see, because we were blending multiple documents, like say for recreation, there's an incredible depth of policy work and action planning within that department, bringing that into here, and then I could see there was some things that were very clearly could be actions, and I think that a very solid edit could go through to pare that down, so that the document reflects kind of what we're talking about is having a separate policies, official community plan, and then action document. I think too, Councillor Brown is talking about what makes a good policy, where it's priorities and strategy. Those are words that we're not quite using. We're using policies and actions. But really this exercise of official community plan, what are we trying to achieve? I can see it's a large dialogue with the community, really focusing on identifying the goals, the general direction, what are the priorities for the community, and I think, yeah, figuring out what language best represents the categories and the focus that we're trying to achieve in this, and I don't feel that yet that the clarity of what the OCP is going to achieve is quite yet attained, and I think more editing needs to occur to separate out sort of maybe those more specific actions from the overall strategic direction. That's just a general impression. Thank you.
And I'll just say my 2 cents here. For me, the issue's always been, why is it council strategic plan? And I've been pretty vocal about that. This should be official community plan created by the community, not by this council, with input from that, and then the council sets a direction. Then the plans are done by each area. Like I worked in the federal government. In federal government, the boss sets the priorities, that's it, they're out. Then you give them the action plans and they decide, each department, which action plans they support and that's how it moves forward, which is very simple, very concise, and very easy. But like for me, this has become a council official community plan. I've said that from day one. I think this should be a community plan, not council-led. I believe that very strongly because a lot of the council or the city priorities are not necessarily our priorities, so I think that's important. And to Councillor Thorpe's point, the reason that I'm with Councillor Brown on that is that because this is a strategy plan, if you look, it doesn't say strategic direction by council, it says strategic plan. And if it's a plan, then we're responsible for those actions and those items. That's why I've always believed it should be a council strategic direction, not a plan. So those are my 2 cents. Thank you. So if you want to move on, that's it. Here.
Can I just, Madam Chair, just based on what I'm hearing from the discussion, which a good discussion, I'm glad that the committee's having that because I think it's important for us to hear. I think, and I just want to reflect upon the fact that, I mean, this is a kind of a bold aspirational goal here to meld all of our planning documents into one. So you're seeing a lot of policies that have been elevated from other plans, and I understand and I agree with there's ones that are debatable about where should these be actions, should they be goals. So I would suggest that with that lens on it, we're going to work through the next 3 goals, hopefully this afternoon. If there are specific ones in there that the steering committee sees as better suited to actions, then let's have that discussion, and we welcome that kind of recommendation. And if we can replace what is perceived to be too specific in action with a more general statement about what the goals and objectives are, then I think that's good feedback, but we'd like to get that today for sure.
Councillor Geselbrecht?
Yeah, I just saying I agree with that, and then I think just Councillor Brown's point, without having the action plan, I think I suffer a little bit of FOMO anxiety that something probably is an action, but I want to make sure that it gets addressed and is written down somewhere, and hate to see it disappear from the OCP and become an action. And I'll work on my FOMO, but I think that might be a little bit what's going on, and so I think being judicious and if we know the action plans are coming and that discussion. So thanks.
That's good for conversation. I don't see anybody else. Ms. Bolsing?
Okay, so I'm going to quickly run through Goal 3, a healthy Nanaimo. Here are the different subtopics within Goal 3. Policies on affordable housing, intergenerational living, food security, community safety and well-being, emergency management, recreation, culture, and wellness. And to my left, I have Richard Harding. I also have Lynn Warwick behind me. And I also have Karen Lindsay, and Richard and Lynn will be doing some presentations, some of these pieces, and we also have other staff like Karen and others to answer questions as we go through. So this is going to be pretty high level. You've got the document in front of you, and it's just basically a check-in. Are we on the right track? You've yet to hear the community's feedback through the surveys, but just to get a sense of your feedback at this point on the different sections. So with the affordable housing, that was an important piece of the 2008 OCP. It did deal with a specific section of affordable housing under Goal 3, social enrichment. In 2018, our council, you endorsed an affordable housing strategy, and then in 2021, the Health and Housing Action Plan. So many of the things that you see elevated or in there are from documents that have been previously endorsed by council. Now, what we've done is we've looked at really integrating those documents in, carrying forward certain policies, like one that you'll be familiar with is strata conversions that exists in the current OCP that's been carried forward into the present. And so for the community, what that means is a policy basically saying that we will restrict the conversion of strata buildings when vacancy rates fall below 3%. And so that helps protect our rental market stock. We also have new policies around existing affordable rental housing and tenant protection. And again, this reflects direction and conversations that we've had with council, and also very much guided by the priority of the community in looking at housing affordability. So this is the section on affordable housing, and it outlines our desired outcomes or our objectives, and then includes different tools that are being proposed. So I won't go through every single one, but it's just more an opportunity for you to give us some feedback on this section, any concerns you have, any things that you like, and just do an overall check-in with you.
Councillor Brown?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And just to reiterate, I think the overall goals and priorities are very on point and speak well to a lot of what came out of the original survey. Just for conversation, I think there's a lot of good stuff in here, but this building off of what you were just talking about. So, for example, items 3.19, use tax revenues from short-term rental accommodation to support increased access to low-income and special needs housing. Item C 3.1.13, restrict strata conversions of existing residential. To me, those are very much actions. And so that's where I would just, building off the last conversation, if those are better suited for action plans. That's where, just put it on the table for comment. Thanks.
Okay.
And now for my question, because I see no one else. Is there the definition for affordable housing in there that we're using? Because there's so many different definitions out there that which one are we using, the 30%?
Through the chair, yes, there is a glossary, and I'm afraid it's not actually in the document as it speaks, and I'll maybe get one of the team to text me what we've actually got, but it is based on the 30% of income, similar to the BC housing piece on affordability. So maybe one of my team who are listening in right now could pull up the glossary for me, and I can come back to you with what that is.
No, that's fine. It's just that that was a question that was asked for me. What definition are we using? And I said I thought it was a 30%, but yeah. Thank you. Councillor Bonner?
Thank you, Chair. Question I have, and going back and forth on this thing, is health and wellness. I think I'm on page 109, and it's C 3.6.41. And it says advocate for provisions of adequate coordinated health programs and services to meet community needs and strengthen the health of all community members. And the lead word here is advocate. So is that an action item, or now is that an overall policy?
Excellent question. So we do have it in here as a policy, and I think this is one of the pieces where we're saying, where there are nuances. And ultimately, if you'd like to see this move to an action, it can be. Same with some of the other ones that Councillor Gasselbach and others. So I will say to yourselves in the community, this is definitely not an exact science. We are lifting policies from previously endorsed documents that Council has endorsed, whether it's the Health and Housing Action Plan or others. And so staff has gone through something like 40 different Council endorsed documents and attempted to do this. And I think that one of the things we personally have struggled with is, okay, Council's endorsed this here as a policy. Do we put it here, or do we decide that this is an action? So I'd say Council, give us your direction on this one.
Anything further, Councillor Bonner?
No, I'll think on it.
Councillor Brown, do you have another question? No, seeing. Councillor Gasselbach.
Thanks. Just on the discussion around what's an action, what's a policy, like, is it something that, like, I think this exercise of integrating all our policies is incredibly important, and it's necessary to sort of create a new organizational structure that we can track things better and be able to execute more effectively. I think that it's going to take a long time, because different policies are at sort of like different scales along that continuum of broad strategic to, and depending on where it fell in the department. I understand we're on like a pretty tight timeline as well, but don't want to give up, I think this important integrative process. Can we give like just a general, like as general feedback to go through this document and do a general like scan through and see if different policies could be, some that can be clumped together, and then ones that are clearly actions can be parceled out, as opposed to, like Council going through one by one? Or is that process already gone through by staff to the degree that everybody feels comfortable with, even if it may extend the timeline a little bit? and things could be parked into, you know, a general actions document that, you know, council can see, you know, what has been moved out so that, you know, we don't have to worry about missing anything. I don't know if that's asking too much, but in terms of just efficiency on that, as opposed to going through each one and sort of council debating whether it be moved or not, I just, it's a question.
Through the chair, this is our attempt to do that very thing. Okay. And it's certainly, you're saying it's not perfect, hence the word draft.
Yeah.
And we're going back out to the community to test run it and say, okay, does this make sense? You've told us what your priorities are. Does this document address those at a high level? And what are your thoughts? So this is our attempt to do that. I would say that in the interests of council and the community having a high-level document, is there enough with tweaks for us to move forward on, knowing that you will come back with the integrated actions plan in the fall and get a chance to go through that and add to it. It's not just simply that we're putting together things that you've told us previously and other new actions. You also get to come up with actions that you think will work towards implementing this. Now, we can go through, and the plan today was certainly not to go through every one of these, because I'd have you here till 4 in the morning instead of 4 p.m. So the intent was to just generally see, have we got the right desired outcomes or objectives? And do we have enough policies here to get us in the right direction for you to support those specific actions? So I don't know if you'd like to discuss that more before we move forward.
I'll do some follow-up.
Yeah, I mean, I've got feedback on specific sections that I can give, and I think we'll just keep going with this process, and thanks.
For me, when I look at all your policies, every one of them to me is an action item. The policy should be, to me, that Nanaimo will do everything within its power to ensure there's affordable housing supply. That, to me, is the policy. And then these are the action items of how to get there, like consider using rental zoning to secure a portion. That's not a policy to me. That's an action item to get to what our policy is. Like, to me, when I read this, anytime you have an action verb, that's an action. Okay. So to me, that's how, like, that's where my concern came in, as Councillor Brown was saying to me. These are all action items. They're not actually policies. Like, encourage isn't a policy. A policy should never encourage. A policy, you will. As you said, clear, concise. Encourage is a really great word, right? So for me, like when I looked at it, just about everything here to me, read to me as an action item, not as a policy. So that's my 2 cents. Anybody else? No? Seeing none, I guess you can move on. Oh, Councillor Bonner.
Thank you. I have actually a question for His Worship. and again, it's on the same page, and I'll just read it out for you. And it's C 3.6.39 is advocate and provide support for programs to increase the percentage of secondary students who carry on post-secondary education. I'm all for that idea. A lot of times when you're talking to council, you talk about the roles and our mandate and our jurisdiction and things along those lines. How does that fit with you? Because I'm not seeing that necessarily a city thing, although I'm 100% in agreement with it.
Hang on.
Thank you, if I may. Well, let's start from the bottom. The city is where the rubber hits the road in terms of housing. We have jurisdiction over the land and what's built on it and what the zoning is and all of those things. The senior levels of government have historically provided funding to ensure that housing was available. We had a much more robust national housing strategy 30 years ago. It's getting to be now practically. I don't see anything that's inconsistent with what we're saying there in terms of encouraging. As we know, previous council put in place policy that means that roughly, I think it's, and Mr. Lindsay or Ms. Popel-Singh will correct me if I'm wrong, something in the range of 60 to 70% of new single-family dwellings in this community contain a secondary suite. A mortgage helper, as it's often referred to, which allows for densification in neighborhoods without the kind of what some might see as intrusive multi-residential buildings going up. So I think we do our part where we can. We have a role to play. But ultimately, on the larger projects, let's face it, it's going to be the private sector in large measure. It's not going to be a single built family house builder. And it's going to be federal and provincial government monies, such as we've seen in Nickel Street. I mean, those are provincial dollars providing much needed housing for a segment of our community that otherwise would not be able to afford that kind of accommodation. So I think I'm getting your point, but I don't see it as inconsistent with anything that's been said by council or staff, frankly, who bring the expertise to this table that, with great respect to all of us around this table, none of us bring in terms of either longevity, experience, or training. I don't know if that answers Councillor Bonner's question or not.
Follow-up?
Yeah, and no, I just wanted to thank, I wasn't putting you on the spot or anything. You're the go-to person for this, so I just wanted to know how that fit with you, sort of thing.
I'm flattered to have the phrase go-to person used in any respect when it comes to my abilities, but I wouldn't necessarily agree with you, but thank you.
Councillor Hemmons.
Thanks, Chair. I'll be really brief. I wonder if we just have maybe chosen an incorrect term, because we don't have policies, and I don't know what the correct term would be, but we're seeing, you know, folks think they're actions. I'm seeing they're divided in between tools, funding, protection, housing, et cetera. I think those are good titles, but when, in terms of clarity, when someone says we have a policy to assess sites for affordable and supportive housing projects, I want to read that policy. And in the current draft, I can't look at that. Does that? So for me, it's not a policy if it's a sentence. A policy is a bit more fleshed out. A policy is something I can read and it has measurables, et cetera. But maybe this came from the affordable housing strategy, and therefore we identify it as such, an affordable housing strategy policy. So all of this is to say, I don't think we're off the mark. I think we're actually very close. It's just we want to be really careful with semantics and making sure that we're clear about what we say we want to do versus what we are doing and doing well versus, you know, just my 2 cents. Thank you.
Well, if Minister Eby has his way, we won't have to worry about this when he tables legislation in the fall, because he's going to take over zoning. Going to get that in.
Chair, if I may say, I wouldn't count on Mr. Eby relieving us of our responsibilities to take the grit at the level. I think with only very few exceptions, most of the municipal councils in this province have worked very hard to increase and secure housing. Now, if Mr. Eby wants to go after, and I don't mean to pick on the good citizens of Oak Bay, which have basically limited themselves entirely to existing multi-residential units and single-family dwellings only, Mr. Eby may have a point, but I think, with respect, some of what he has commented on is a misreading of the UBCM report about housing in general. I think I can look at staff today in this city and look at the development that's taking place in our community, which I appreciate is upsetting to very many people. But the fact is this council has approved a number of housing units and development, which is providing housing, yes, expensive as it is, but nevertheless, where the gap is faced, and this council is well aware of it, is with the most vulnerable of our society, who are literally living in our streets, and what I'll call the next tier up, who are barely able to pay for or indeed find and locate housing that is even remotely accessible to them because of lack of income, lack of supply, lack of suitability, all of those things. But I'm not expecting any miracles from Victoria on this one. Although if they'd care to announce sufficient funds to house the most vulnerable of our city in a quick way with a timeline, I'd be very pleased to hear that. You shouldn't mention me, Councillor Armstrong. You'll just get a long diatribe like you just did, but thank you.
I'm quite fine with that, because also the laundry report is coming out in May, which will be very interesting. Ms. Bopelsing?
So through the chair, I think we've actually had some feedback and discussion here. And so welcome to have more on this. Of course, this is your meeting. And if you would like any further direction on this particular one, so we're on the first one of goal 3, which is affordable housing. So would you like any more discussion before we move on to intergenerational living?
I see Councillor Geselbrecht's name.
Oh, no, and this goes for the majority of the sections that we're talking about. I think what's in there is great. Like everything is in there. I think we're struggling with just sort of how we're categorizing things and how it's communicated. But in terms of content, regardless of whether it's a strategy, a priority, a policy, or an action, the right stuff is in there. And I think we just have work to do to structure.
Mr. Sims?
Thanks, Madam Chair. I just wanted to pick up and maybe exploit a few things that Councillor Hemmons had said. I thought it's a little bit of an aha. The word policy is maybe introducing the confusion, and it, from a staff point of view, this is a policy document, so it'll be adopted by council as council policy. So, and then you say, oh, I want to see the affordable housing strategy or the affordable housing policy, which is a different kind of a document with this is how we're going to do these. It does kind of muddy the waters. But if it helps, it's just really to say that what we're calling policies in here is the flavor of what the community would like to see its city be in 25 years. As we've been pointing out, and as Mr. Lindsay said, this is a whole bunch of strategic documents rolled into one, which really keeps it coherent. But this is the flavor, and how do we cook that flavor is in the action plans. But are you for affordable housing or against affordable housing? I'm oversimplifying, but that's the sort of flavor that we're looking for from the steering committee and from the community. So I don't know if that helps or muddies the waters further.
Thank you. Councillor Brown?
Sure, I'm just wondering if the language we're looking for here is policy statement, right? It's just saying what it is, not the actual policy. But just a thought.
Thank you. Ms. Policing?
Okay, through the chair, I'm just wondering if there's any more follow-up you need from me on this section?
No.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so the next one is intergenerational living. And so in 2008 OCP, under the Livable Communities, there was some wording that supported that. And then in 2019, Council endorsed the age-friendly plan. And we've used the term intergenerational living, which incorporates the philosophies of the age-friendly Nanaimo. And what you'll see is not only this section, do we have intergenerational living, but when you look at, you heard from Jamie Rose on the Connected last week, all throughout the document, terms like universal access, all of that is about intergenerational living and providing equitable access regardless of a person's age and ability. But this specific section is included here because it raises and recognizes the fact that we are an age-friendly community under the BC Ministry of Health, and Council had endorsed that in 2019. So that's this section here, and you'll see that it also is, sometimes people when they think age-friendly are specific to one different age, and you'll see that this also includes children and youth, as well as the concept of aging in place and intergenerational connection, which was a really big and important piece for our Nanaimo age-friendly community. So with that, perhaps I'll pause there and before I go on to the food security section.
Councillor Martman.
Thank you. Through the community, I've had some feedback on the topic of the day right now, which is public safety. And it ties into the next section, which is the community safety and well-being, where we do have a couple of pages related to it. But I've had feedback that perhaps because of the situations we find ourselves in with public safety, that perhaps that should be integrated more in different sections in the document. And I'm just wondering what your thoughts are.
Through the chair, I think we're going to have some good discussion when we come to this section and address exactly that. the other thing about weaving it through, one of the things, if you look at this document and you're thinking about the whole integrated goals, all of the things that we're doing, even if it's not called community safety and well-being, is about a healthier community. And so while it may not be dealing with things that have specific labels like crime and security, if you add up all of the different objectives, they are aiming towards building a better and healthier community. So, but maybe we could do that in other ways, and maybe as we get to that section, we can discuss that more. Are you okay if we proceed with the next two, so I go in sequence?
Yeah, I just thought it kind of tied into intergenerational living as well, because for all ages, we want everybody to feel safe, so.
Right.
Thank you.
Yeah, I have a couple comments on that too from what I received back, and there was research just done in Toronto as well by their planners where they're saying we're building the wrong kind of homes for seniors. Most seniors want single level entry, that's it. We're not building those because we're building the 2 stories, and it's the same for those with wheelchairs, right? They want just the small rancher, 1,200 square feet, or the patio homes, which goes against one of our other policies, which is to build more, which is to build up. So I find that's always interesting because that was a thing that they said, we're not building the type of homes that people want. Like, I have friends that are sitting in 4,000 or 5,000 square foot homes that would move, but they want their level entry. They don't want to go to, you know, and they have their basement suite empty because they don't want people living there, but we're not building the houses that they will move to, so they stay in these big homes that they don't need to. So that's just food for thought as well, that we need to look at that as well. Sorry, Mayor Krog?
Thank you, Chair, and you know, Chair, and I don't mean this in a critical way, but I think it points out something that people don't necessarily grasp. We don't build the housing. The community, through the private sector and through provincial and federal governments, build the housing. I'm on board with you in terms of demand for patio-style homes, ranchers, one level, etc. Personally, as I'm in my senior years, I'm grateful for the stairs in our house because it provides the only form of exercise I get during the day. So I'm going to die there if I can have my wish. But having said that, I appreciate they're in high demand. But the reality of patio homes, as opposed to a condo-style apartment building with several floors, is quite simply you require more land to do so. And I have said over and over again at this council, and I think most councillors around this table agree, if that's what you want, then you have to be prepared to expand the city limits, essentially, take in more of the green space of the regional district, and allow for more urban sprawl, more expense, kilometers and kilometers of extra sewer and water lines and all of those things. And I appreciate the demand for it, but builders are also recognizing the marketplace. The reality is, if I can put 10 patio homes on a half acre or an acre of land, as opposed to 50 apartment units or 50 condominiums, what am I going to do? We know what the profit margin is. I'm going to build the condos or apartments, and by our very demand and by the price of things, unless we're prepared to subsidize those kinds of dwellings, be they patio homes or otherwise, that's what we're going to get. I'm not saying we give up or we abandon it, but I think we have to get past the concept that somehow councils and politicians have the kind of control over what our communities develop into. You know, as I used to make a joke in Victoria, if it was easy to balance budgets, governments would do it all the time so they'd get reelected. If we could build the perfect community here, we would do so, but we can't. And if we want to protect the environment in terms of becoming something that doesn't spread out all over the landscape like some of the prairie towns or the greater Toronto area, then we're going to have to accept the fact that we're going up. And so that maybe when I can't make it up those stairs anymore, I'll be moving, or Sharon and I'll be moving into one of those condos with an apartment because it makes more sense. Anyways, I'm just not saying, I don't think I've said anything that anyone else has said, but I've said this more for the benefit of the public as we engage in this. But those are the realities of a developing city. And we are a developing city. We are not a coal town with a coal town mentality, as I've said many times. And that means we may not be able to get what we want, to use the words of the song, but we might get what we need. And I think that's what the hard work of staff and the community's input into this yes, jokingly referred to as a massive document, has produced. And that is a vision for this community that will guide us well over time. I'll say right now, and it'll save me saying it later towards the end of the day, I'm pretty pleased with what people have managed to put together to date. And yes, it'll take some tweaking, I'm sure, but overall, as I said once before, I think other communities will be looking at this for a number of years and saying, let's just follow Nanaimo. They've done the work. We don't have to spend our time getting through it. Anyways, enough yak.
Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Chair. I'm pleased that the mayor has changed his quotes from old dead white guys to, old rock bands. But I agree with you in terms of what's available. Every single apartment is a level entry house, right? Basically, it's all on one level. And there, so as long as the ability for people to either live in place or have a place that I think is the important part. I mean, Berwick's on 3 floors. So it's not like they went and did it all in one line either. So I think that's where we're going. Thank you.
Ms. Popolsek, oh, sorry, Mr. Lindsay.
Madam Chair, I just wanted to point out, I think, back to a question that Councillor Martman had about how these different sections integrate. And I think one of the things that's not on the slide today for council members who are following along with your hard copies, you'll see it. For anybody looking online at the draft, you'll see it. There's actually a link. So staff have been very conscious putting this document together that the vast majority of people that we think will interact with it, of course, will be online, not in a hard copy. So there's links down the bottom of each of these sections that will take you to other policies that we believe are integrated with this policy. So there'll be a link to the community safety section, as you mentioned, for example. So I just wanted to make sure people were aware that they're not shown on the slides here today, but they are shown in the document and will be live links for sure.
Seeing no further speakers, Ms. Popolsek.
Okay, thank you. So in terms of food security, under the 2008 OCP, we had a specific section under the social enrichment goal. And then in 2020, we had council direction to, partly triggered by COVID and concerns over food security, we did a emergency food and nutrition strategy. And so you'll see some of the directions that council endorsed are lifted up into this section 3.3. And you'll also notice that there is a strong integration because, of course, we have long had community gardens and different amenities provided by the city around food security. And it really ties into our parks, recreation and culture and wellness approach. Council's purchase of the Park Avenue property is perhaps one of the clear reimagined projects in the works that addresses not only environmental concerns around rainwater management, but also food security and also the potential for affordable housing. So just an example of that integration. And as Mr. Lindsay pointed out, the icons at the bottom of the page also show for food security how that's woven throughout different elements of the document. So that this is a section what it looks like with the desired outcomes. And then it has sections on partnerships, because we know that's an important component of food security, and then looking at public land and infrastructure. So with that, and please feel free to pause me if I'm moving too fast through different sections, but as I pause here, any discussion around the direction in this document with this section? Any questions?
No, seeing none, you can move ahead.
Okay, thank you. Okay, and now we get on to the topic of 3.4, which is community safety and well-being, and I know that we're going to have some good discussion around that. So the 2008 OCP speaks to community safety under 2 policies under the Livable Community Goal, and what we've done with this document and reflecting the priority and the concerns we heard from the community, we've made it a whole separate section within the Healthy Goal, and looking at lifting up what was in the 2008, which was very focused on things like crime prevention through environmental design and partnerships, but taking that a step further with some of the information we've heard through our work with the Health and Housing Task Force, concerns raised by community during the Reimagine process. And you'll also notice that we have a specific section on emergency management as its own standalone. And again, both these sections relate to other components in the document. So I thought that perhaps I'll pause because I do know that Council has been hearing some feedback and perhaps have some discussion that they can support us with on this.
Councillor Hemmons.
Thank you, Chair. And growing from Councillor Martman's earlier comments, I think we could all recognize that safety and security really is a key priority of our community. And so what I'd like to do is make a motion to pull community safety out, make it its own category. So I'm going to move to have staff change the title of section 3.4 to safety and security and add additional policies reflecting the importance of community safety.
Seconded by Councillor Bonner. Oh, sorry, Councillor Martman.
If I
Further
may,
discussion?
If I'll just add that I think, I think we can all see why this is important. If we have a section on emergency management, we probably should have a section on community safety. It's on the tip of everyone's tongues. It's something we talk about a lot. There's safety and security policy statements that are in other sections. I'd like those to be brought under. And then we're also receiving our downtown security. I'm not sure if it's an audit or a report, but I see that that would be really good fodder for new policy statements under that section.
Councillor Martman.
I definitely support the motion. Thank you, Councillor Hemmons. I'm just wondering if community safety and well-being, do we have to have only 12 community input themes, or could it actually fit into one of the themes? We have 12. Can we have 13?
So through the chair, those themes are what the community told us. So that's what we collected in phase 1, and that reflects the community's feedback. It's not,
oh, okay.
Yeah, whereas, so I think that's some confusion is the community gave us feedback that way. We've taken it and put it into, council's directed us to use a framework to organize our goals. And so we currently have 5 goals that we've organized all those themes under. So
this was their strongest 12 themes from the community. Although I'm hearing from the community about well-being and safety, but I understand what you're saying now. Because I think that's where somebody got it mixed up, where some people in the public were thinking these were our priorities instead of the community's.
Right, and you'll notice that there is under, I think it's called city living, that it's, again, it comes down to language and how we're using language. Yeah. And so you'll see under the term supportive city, we're worried about the social challenges our community is facing and how to help all people live healthier, happier lives while keeping our city feeling safe and welcoming.
Right.
And so that's a summary of what we heard under that theme.
Okay.
Now, through the chair, I wouldn't mind clarifying. So we currently have a section titled Community Safety and Well-Being. Can we keep that section, strike out the well-being and security in that, and then add policies versus doing a new one and transporting them over?
Councillor Hemmons.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I think that would be fine as long as I haven't done a thorough read of all of the other ones that would fall under it. If they don't fall under safety and security, let's find another place for them.
Okay.
We just want to make it fit.
Yeah. Great. Thank you.
Mayor Krog.
Thank you very much, Chair. Sometimes you have to do things in politics that are actually political. I think there's certain members of our community and fairly vocal and articulate members who think that the fact the document doesn't say it plain straight out that we care about crime and safety in our neighborhoods, etc., that therefore it's not important to us. And during my discussions with a couple of folks last week, I said that, you know, if that's the concern, if depending on how it's stated, we will be setting the city up for criticism for failing to solve those things which are not ours to frankly solve. When I look at the term community safety and well-being, well-being for me would include the kind of supports and help and secure facilities, I would argue, for some of our street population who are in desperate need of that kind of support. Community well-being means to me, and I look at Councillor Bonner when I say this, that the children in this community would be fed, would not be arriving at school hungry. But we are not the Board of Education, and we don't deliver social assistance either. And so I guess I'm having a little bit of trouble with Councillor Hemmond's motion in this sense. If we want a statement essentially that says that we are aware of, concerned about, troubled, frustrated, angered, frightened, disturbed, all of the things that everyone in our community is feeling right now around the street disorder and the crime that flows from people trying to feed their addictions. Oh, duh. And who isn't? Of course, that's the way we feel. But I'm not entirely sure how we articulate that, or whether we should even be articulating it in this particular document. This is an official community plan. Do we want everyone to live in a safe community and enjoy well-being while they're here? Absolutely. So I'm kind of a bit mixed here. Particularly when Ms. Bhopal Singh very wisely reminded us that the themes that came up are the themes that came up from our community. And Councillor and the chair earlier today talked about, you know, I sometimes concerned this is a council-driven document. Well, unless staff have completely misinterpreted what they heard, that's what the community told us. Now, maybe that's because they all understand that we don't have control over the solutions to those issues, whether it's housing, policing, charging processes, hospitalization, healthcare, addiction treatment, et cetera, et cetera. Maybe that's what it means, and if we interpret it that way, then they're way ahead of us. They've got it, they figured it out, and they know where to go to ask for the solutions. So I think this is a very important debate today, and it's the kind of debate where I think we have to think carefully about what it is we're trying to achieve with Councillor Hemmond's motion. What is the message we want to send to the community? More importantly, what is the message they've already sent to us as council through their recognized themes? And how do we, and I say this quite candidly, in an election year, make sure that people understand, yes, we understand and we hear you, but we also recognize what it is we can and cannot do. You know, I look at Ms. Wark and Mr. Harding sitting there. I'm sure they're thinking, you know, if we had more community programs for youth in this town, we'd probably prevent a certain amount of future crime and addiction issues. Or maybe, you know, people with skills would be observing the behaviors of the children in those programs and recognize that they needed some counseling or assistance. I mean, it's a multitude of things, and it's very complex. So I guess I'm saying I need to hear a little more from Councillor Hemmons and other councillors today. What are we driving at if we're going to set this out separately? What do we hope to achieve? And if it's just stating we're going to advocate with those levels of government that have the responsibility and control, so be it. I mean, how many times do I have to say it, and other councillors and people in the community say it? We don't appoint the judges, we don't run the court system, we pay for the police, but we don't direct, nor do we have the jurisdiction or authority to direct them what to do and how to conduct their business. We don't determine the charging reasons people are charged under our current system. We don't deliver addiction and healthcare services. We do none of the above. But Lord knows, we get all the correspondence, the mail, the complaint, the concerns, and we hear the sad and frustrating stories that come across, well, I won't say at our desk anymore because it comes via an electronic device, but every day, day in, day out, numerous stories about this. So again, what is it we're trying to achieve with this? Community safety and well-being.
I'm going to go to Councillor Brown, then it will be Geselbrecht, Hemmons, Bonner, and Martman.
Thanks, Madam Chair. And too, we'll be looking for, I hope, a little bit more clarity on the intention here, but as it stands now, I don't think I'll be supporting this. I kind of like or it's not that I like it, I think it's actually appropriate, the holistic category that I think acknowledges some particulars in there, but sort of views it through the lens that this is a complex problem at the intersection of a lot of issues. And I think society has really gotten to that place, and it is beneficial that we've gotten to that place, so that's how we view it. So I kind of think that should be preserved. And, you know, just learned last week that, you know, even e-com is going to be, hopefully, you know, going the way of where if you call 911, it's your traditional fire, police, ambulance, but then, you know, they're looking at how do we health and a counselor on there as well. So I think the trend here is a more holistic approach and a more holistic lens of how we tend to view these. And I don't think, while it may speak to certain members of the community and speak to some emotions that we all feel from time to time, when I think about the tone and the frame moving forward, I do think it's important to take that holistic look and really a comprehensive look at how we might tackle the problem and just, you know, I don't think there's anything wrong with stating that these are interconnected problems and they're not always easy to navigate. So unless I'm convinced otherwise, I will be voting against this. Thank you.
Councillor Geselbrecht?
Thanks. Yeah, I'm struggling a little bit with the language, and maybe I don't understand it as clearly what the motion, but reading through this, I thought that this section really dealt with, a complex situation that we were struggling with in our community around community safety, and then also around the conditions that have led to this situation and what is a very complex and way of having to deal with it, both at root causes, but also the immediate community safety issues of just, you know, safety and security on the streets. And I think depending on your location being of experience of social disorder is what language you're going to use and you're going to want. And I know that some people have come out very strongly on the community safety and security and, you know, about police presence and security and this, and then other folks, you know, the number one security threat is people not having homes. And I think we want to communicate to all demographics in this community that we take people's safety and well-being extremely seriously, and we'll be addressing it at all levels that we can. And when you look at, you know, what we've actually budgeted, you know, specifically with this council in terms of police and security, and also in housing, we've done, you know, our level best to approach things in a very mindful, holistic, and effective way. So my concern is by splitting it, we're kind of reducing the orientation down to kind of an us versus them mentality a little bit. And I guess that would be my concern, is that the language kind of pushes that polarization. And I know as we enter into an election, there is going to be very polarized approach from people on what's happening on our streets. And I don't want to further perpetuate that by offering more of a simplistic categories on how it's being addressed. So I guess that would be my concern. I can also appreciate that given what's happening on our streets, there is very strong feelings, and we need to use language that communicates to everyone that it's being taken seriously and we have policies put in place. And if somebody can't see that we're taking community safety and security very strongly by having a section in our OCP that says community safety and well-being, and having policies that are very directly address around emergency services response and security and police and that. I don't think, you know, I don't think we can make it any more clear. So yeah, I guess I'm struggling a little bit. Thank you.
I'm going to go to first-time speakers. I'm going to go to Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Chair. I'm in support of the motion, and I'll tell you why. In that something happened shortly after we got elected, and a number of people talked about it, how the city sort of became a big city. And we're no longer the rural thing, we're now a big city. We've passed over 100,000. The issue of public safety, not only for those who are living on the streets and the services that they need, but the services that the public needs in helping deal with other issues of safety and in our community are not going to go away regardless of how much housing gets built. They're always going to be here with us. So this is a long-term document. It's 10, 20, 30 years down the road. And I believe that people want to know that what is our position on this? You know, where's the plans? You know, what are we doing, right? So I think thinking long-term it's probably not a bad thing because we're no longer a rural community. We seem to be no longer a community of citizens. We're more a community of taxpayers who want services and they want them last week, sort of thing. That we need to be able to be very specific on how we're going to deal with this problem, not only now, which is obviously a serious issue in our city, but how we're going to deal with it long term. Like how we're going to be building houses, how we're going to be laying out networks to maintain the security and safety of our citizens. So I look at it as a long-term thing, and I think it's important enough to have a place on its own in the community plan. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Martman?
Thank you. I was wondering, Councillor Hemmens, can you read the motion back to me? Thank you.
Oh, sorry.
It's okay. There we go.
Oh, I just turned you off. There you go. Now it's off again. There you go.
Move to change the title of section 3.4 to safety and security and add additional policies reflecting the importance of community safety. And with that, I meant the recommendations that are coming from our downtown security audit.
Thank you. And I don't see it as splitting. I see it as enhancing of being able to really make the statement of public safety and security is paramount, at least for this council and the community that is working through this official community plan for the next 30 years. And I have a feeling it will stay as a priority for a number of years. So I agree. I think it should be. Thank you.
Councillor Turley?
Thank you, Chair. So I too have met with a couple of guys, and I didn't agree with everything they said. However, I'm not convinced, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think this motion that Councillor Hemmens has given is specifying that we need to have a 13th policy as opposed to just the 12. In my opinion, it should be an action in all 12 policies because it affects virtually everything in our city. So having its own separate category, I don't think is necessarily the way to go. Now, please correct me if I'm assuming the wrong thoughts on this particular motion.
Thank you. Councillor Giselbrecht?
Yeah, just questions, just clarity, because I'm not entirely sure what we're doing. So from my understanding, Councillor Hemmens, the motion is to add the word security to the title, including well-being or removing well-being, and have it community safety and security, and then separating the policies that have to do with well-being from the safety and security ones, or yeah, I'm not entirely clear.
Go to Councillor Hemmens. It shows you.
Yeah. So my motion is simply to change the title and to beef it up. If I'm putting it in layman's terms, change the title, make it clear to the community what we're trying, and beef it up.
Mm-hmm. And so in terms of like, do you feel that the word well-being doesn't reflect what the policies within here are getting at? It's just not a direct enough term?
Your mic's still on.
Okay, I just wasn't sure if you were okay going back and forth. So I think wellness captures it for us. I think wellness captures it for staff. I think wellness captures it for a lot of people, but safety and security are what Nanaimo residents are talking about. And so for me, this is literally semantics. This is not changing any policies other than to beef it up with what we know is on its way and to change the title. So, you know, to Mayor Krog's point, sometimes this is a political job. And I think this is a political piece because I think if you asked anyone, do you think community safety and well-being encompasses or targets what they see downtown and they feel downtown, they're going to say no. So it works for me. I think it works for the planners. It works for people who use that language. But I think, to Councillor Thorpe's point, this is a community plan. This isn't a plan for planners. So thank you.
Councillor Giselbrecht, anything further?
And I guess another question, just in how would you feel kind of keeping well-being in there, but calling it community safety, security, and well-being? Does it still distort the meaning, having the
I don't
word
think
well-being?
it's as strong, and I think what the community is looking for is strength in this.
Okay, going to go to Councillor Thorpe.
Oh, thank you, Chair. I've been listening to this conversation with interest, and I haven't spoken yet, and I admit to being a little bit of mixed emotions on this. When I first looked at the heading of this section and saw the word well-being, my first thought went to recreation and a healthy lifestyle, and that's covered later in the document more so. So recognizing that there's integration in most of these compartments. I certainly hear what Councillor Hemmons is driving at, and we've all seen the emails and got the phone calls and had the conversations. It's probably the #1 issue in our city that I'm hearing about, and that is social disorder on our streets, especially downtown. And what are we going to do about it? What can we do about it? So I think the community needs to know that we recognize those concerns and we acknowledge that that is a priority. That said, I'm not sure that I support sort of this response to a populist concern that we need to specifically target that in this document. I think what we've got here is good enough. The rubber's going to hit the road when it comes to action plans on this, going back to our earlier discussion. And when we get recommendations from our downtown financial audit, then maybe that will spur some action plans. And there's certainly different schools of thought on how we should proceed and how we can attempt to tackle the problem. So for me, it's enough that the public knows that we've had this conversation today, that we're aware of the concerns, that we understand that security is an issue, an important one. But I think the wording as it is good enough with that understanding. So I'll listen to further comment, but at this point, I don't feel the need to support the motion as it stands. Thank you.
Okay. And I'm going to speak as a first-time speaker. I fully support this. I asked for community safety to be a strategic priority and was voted down, but I think it's extremely important. It was important to the previous council. Every council that I can recall, community safety has been one of the #1 issues. I think I like the community safety and security because people want to feel secure in their homes. They want their property to be secure. So I think that captures it. Well-being, to me, it's about mental health. It's about recreation. I don't like the word in there. I think it's really important, as to Mayor Krog's comments, there is stuff that this council can do. There is action items. We heard from our superintendent that this community is severely under-resourced in policing, severely under-resourced compared to the rest of the country. We have 1 to 910 cases. Victoria is 1 to 458, so double. So one thing that this council has done, and I'm very proud of this council for adding the increased police presence of 15 officers at the start of the term, another 4 this term, so we're starting to do that. So there's something that council can do. The addition of bylaws. I think we will probably hear when previous Abbotsford Chief of Police, Mr. Rich, comes forward, community safety officers. That's something that we can invest in as well. I've seen this city deteriorate in the last 4 years compared to where it was when, especially in 2008, when the city really got healthy. When I was here back in the 90s, it wasn't a good place. I was asked if I was put in the penalty box when I got transferred here. So that's the reputation in the police world as well. So I think there's things that we can do. We just had a gang shooting here. We've now probably that stabbing's going to be related to gangs, so we're seeing increased gang presence again. So there's things that we can do around that, which is the support. Like for me, I'm a big supporter of restorative justice. When's the last time that this council put more dollars into restorative justice so we can get those young kids before they hit the court system and get them the help? So that's something that I think we can look at. When it comes to community safety, we increased our fire department by four officers earlier than required because we recognized the burnout for the mental health for them. They are responding to the social disorder as well, which isn't even in their job description, but has become part of it, same as the police. So they're taking all these. So I think it's really important I think that the other thing that we can do, one thing that we did do, and this is not about homelessness, this is about chronic offenders. It's the chronic offenders that are causing most of the problems in this community. Everybody assumes it's the homeless. Yes, there's probably, I would say maybe 10 or 20 out of the 500 homeless that are criminals. And not only they're criminals in the community, but they're criminals for those vulnerable populations as well, when they're making the girls go out and do tricks for their drug money, et cetera. So there's things that we can do in the advocacy role. The letter that we wrote requesting these chronic offenders be dealt with. When you talk to a police officer and they said, oh, we arrested this guy 7 times this week, released 7 times, 7 times. I'm not saying he shouldn't be released, but why can't they go on the electric monitoring program, such as what the mayor of Williams Lake has said? So I believe it's really important. I've always felt it's really important that you need to feel safe in your home. I know some of us at our table have been broken into. You know, when my house was broken into, I took my gun home for 3 days. You know, back in the days when you could, because it's that sense of security has been taken away from you. And I think we need to do that. When we talk about CPTED policies in there, some of our other policies go in direct contravention of CPTED. I brought that up when we looked at the downtown design, totally against CPTED policies. So where are we going to marry those two up? When we're talking in oneness for community safety, we're going to use CPTED policies, but when we looked at the redesign of Commercial Street, it goes against a lot of the CPTED policies. So where do we balance that? Which takes those are issues I see. So I think there is a lot that we can do to support this. I think another thing that we missed the point on was the auxiliary police officers. You know, we could have made a request to the province to bring them back. We didn't do that, which was extremely helpful, which frees up police officers to do their jobs. So I think there's lots that can be done. And for me, I really believe in what Councillor Hammond says. I think it's the #1 issue facing this city, as well as other cities in this province and in the country. So I think it needs to have its own little area. So I've spoken enough. I'm going to go to Council Gezerbrecht, Bonner, and then Mayor Krog.
Thanks. Yeah, I guess I feel like we're trying to debate whether this council thinks security is important or not, and nobody would deny here that our security is absolutely important, and we want to engender that. And I agree that, you know, that language could be added into this section. I guess removing the word wellness, though, doesn't make any sense. Like, there's policies in here that say continue to advocate for effective use of health resources, adequate funding, and appropriate programs to address the root causes and effects of mental health and substance use disorders. So if I'm like, okay, safety and security, I know that mental health policy is probably the most fundamental thing. If we want to have a more secure society, yeah, we need to deal with that, or else we're going to be dealing with like some pretty crazy behaviors. But it doesn't read that. You kind of miss that if the title of that section is community safety and security. I mean, that's a well-being policy. And so I think that, you know, another one, encourage and support innovative collaboration between different levels of government agencies and nonprofits to improve early identification, screening, intervention supports to build resilience of children, youth, and their families to improve their social determinants of health that affect future challenges and risks, including homelessness, mental health, substance use disorders, interactions with the justice system. Yes, there's elements that feed security, but like that's, you know, a mental health well-being policy. And so I think a simple solution is, yeah, if we really want to communicate to people that security is important, let's add it in there, but let's not take out well-being. Like, call it community safety, security, and well-being, if that's how we want to do it. Or create 2 separate categories of well-being policies and community safety security if we find it important to differentiate them in a different section. But I don't think the solution is just changing the heading community safety and security. And so I can't support doing that. I would support calling the section community safety, security, and well-being, but not just removing well-being and putting security. And I think that's great. If there's more security policies that are coming forward, let's add them in there. So as the motion stands now, I can't support, but I would support adding the word security to the current title. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Chair. Are we okay? I just wanted to bring, just read a little tiny bit at the very beginning of this section where it says C 3.4, community safety and well-being. Right underneath there's a little blue tab that says 69% of participants in the 2020 statistically validated survey identify social challenges such as public drug use and crime as a top concern for the future of the city. I can probably guarantee you that number is higher now. So I just don't think community safety and well-being as a title cuts it. So it's a semantics thing. It makes a statement that this is where we're heading, or this is what we're concerned about, and this is how we're going to deal with it. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Martman.
Brief. I think it's a bit of semantics, but to me, security actually includes wellness. So to say that programs and services that address root causes, reducing points of entry or re-entry to experiencing poverty, mental health, substance abuse, criminal activity, etc., is part of security. So to me, well-being, and the wording, we've been on this for quite a few minutes, but it is very important. Wording is everything. And I just stand with community safety and security.
Thank you, and I'm going to give the last word to Mayor Krog, unless he speaks others to.
Chair Armstrong, Councillor Brown has his hand raised as well.
Oh, okay, sorry, I missed that. Sorry, Councillor Brown, after Mayor Krog.
Thank you very much, Chair. I just wanted to say that I was hoping we would have a fulsome debate about this today, because it's given Council a chance to express in a very public way its views on this. And I was hoping that enough people would talk about this that I could be satisfied that Councillor Hemmons' motion was the right thing to do. And I'll just say very simply, I am and will be supporting it.
Oh, thank you very much. Councillor Brown, then Councillor Thorpe.
Thanks, Madam Chair, and thanks everyone for their comments. Heard numerous times people mention where we're going. And I think we can play semantics all the time, what we mean with security, but I'm pretty sure here we're not talking about like security as defined by, general needs. We're talking about a very specific type of security, and it's rooted in a very, very specific type of approach. And so for that reason, I do believe it's more than semantics. There's no question, the actions of this council that it's talked about, that we know we have a difficult problem. It takes a multi-pronged approach, and some of our actions that have not been very well liked, such as increasing services and things like that, they have been undertaken, and I think they were done so with unanimous support. So I don't think this is a conversation around our commitment to it. I do agree this is a statement, and the whole thing is statements about where we're going. And to me, this is just playing to a lower common denominator that I don't think is beneficial to where you set a vision for where you want to go. Thank you.
And Councillor Thorpe, it looks like you have the last word.
Oh, thank you, Chair. Really interesting discussion. Yeah, I'm still of mixed emotions, but I appreciate the comments that other councillors have made. And again, for our audience, I want to be clear that there is nobody, I'm clear on saying this, there is nobody on this council that isn't concerned and doesn't hear about the community concerns about social disorder and public safety and security. So we are talking semantics to some extent, and I go back to a phone conversation I had on the weekend with a resident, and we were discussing this topic, and my comment to that person was that I felt it was time that the city needs to make some type of a statement that we do hear concerns and we are trying to address those problems that we see. And so for that reason, I think I will support this motion because it is in a way sending that message that yes, we recognize this is an important priority. So this is a very political discussion, but I guess that's why we're here in a political arena. And I'm not going to vote against something that highlights the need for safety and security in our city. It is a priority. So I'm still not convinced it's totally necessary within this document, but I am not going to oppose it because I support the intent. Thank you.
Thank you. And with that, I am going to call the question as everybody's had lots of opportunity to speak. So all those in favor? Opposed? Seeing Councillor Brown and Councillor Geselbrecht opposed, motion carries. Thank you. This might be appropriate time to take the break, Ms. Snellgrove. So we'll take the break back at 3:10. Thank you.
Hi, Leonard Krogh here. I'm here with Karen Lindsay today. She's going to show me how to sign up for our app.
Voyant Alert, the City of Nanaimo's emergency notification system. So we'll start by going into the App Store, Mayor Krogh.
Done?
Next, you're going to hit search. And you're going to search for the app, which is Voyant Alert. So it's VOYENT. Now you see, it's already selected it. Click there, hit get, and then we're going to install.
And why are we downloading this app?
We're downloading that so that you can get this onto your phone system, and what it will do is it will send you a push notification out. So if the City of Nanaimo issues an emergency alert, it will actually push the notification out onto your phone. The really nice part of this app is that it's anonymous, so it goes by postal code. So we're not requesting you to put your name or personal information in. It just works off of the app through your phone system. There are also, if you have family members or friends that maybe don't have a smartphone or would like another way, you can also sign up online or call our Public Works Department, and they have phone and texting options available as well. So there's lots of options for people depending on what their needs are.
Fabulous. So you can rest with some comfort knowing you can find out what's necessary and know that people who are important to you are notified.
Absolutely. So now you have Voyant Alert on your phone. And now just select open. So the next thing you're going to do is you're going to tap in the postal code that it's prompting you.
All right. So
you just click on there and start entering. And then find on a map. So here you'll see the welcome page for the City of Nanaimo, and you want to subscribe to notifications, yes?
Yes.
Click that you agree to the terms, so click both to the yes for consent, and then hit next. And it's going to ask to either allow or not allow notifications, and you want to always allow.
Always allow.
Always allow. And the reason that is, if you don't allow, it won't push the notification out to you. So always allow.
Always allow.
And now you see here, you've got a message to accept that you've signed out. That's the two-factor authentication, and you're going to tap yes. And now you're in the system. Also, when you have a moment, we recommend that you pick your locations and sign up based on those locations, and then you'll get alerts from the City of Nanaimo.
Karen, thank you. Everyone, sign up.
Hey, Tiana. Hey. It sure is the coldest rink in town.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah, buddy!
Nice save, James!
Wow, your goalie is keeping you guys in the game. Cheers.
Cheers.
Oh, man, that's hot.
Sorry, that's the way I like it. Oh. Go, 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 go!
Penalty shot!
Scalds from hot drinks are a leading cause of hospitalization for children under 5.
2 minutes, stand in the front, unsportsmanlike conduct.
Hot tea and coffee will cause serious burns to a child in less than a second.
Got a kid? Use the lid.
What we have here is the Real Ice technology that was installed at the Nanaimo Ice Center. It allows us to use cold water from traditionally hot water that we used to use for making ice. Basically, the water will come in through the bottom, go in through a vortex idea, making the air bubbles microscopic in size, which makes a better, more dense sheet of ice.
Differences that you'll see with the Real Ice is there's less snow developed, so that's easier for cleaning, and also it's a denser, harder, clear ice. So the ice skaters will certainly enjoy that. And the city plans to implement Real Ice at our other 2 arenas as well. Some of the other efficiencies we've implemented in this facility are LED lights in some areas, and we've also, in the last few years, installed a higher efficiency refrigeration system, which lowers our energy costs. Both Zambonis at our facility are now electrically operated, so there's no harmful emissions, and they're very quiet as well. So what this means for the city is that we're able to use less energy and also reduce the amount of greenhouse gas emissions, which is more beneficial to the environment.
We're here at Bruce and Dundas. Somebody's stolen the street names that were here, so we're here to replace them. Our sign shop has just generated us 2 signs, so I'm going to go through the process of putting it together and reinstalling the street names. First thing, we got to center the signs. We do everything on this truck. We've got all the equipment on here to build, install, remove, repair, whether it's street signs, street names, posts, banners, Christmas decorations, and so forth. I'm going to basically just put the sign in the brackets, and we'll be doing both signs, of course. So I've got a cross bracket that I'm going to put in, and then add the top sign, which is this street we're on, Dundas. Sorry, do the same there. We put the street that we're coming up to on the bottom, so they all basically have the same. The cross street will be on the top. We got to put some bolts in to secure them so nobody will steal the street name. We're ready to go. Just put this back and we'll go out and install this where the missing one is. Every year we do what we call a stop sign survey, where we go around and check all the stops. We clean them, make sure they're in the right spots, in good condition, not bent, and we also clean the street names, make sure they're good. As we're doing that, if there's ones that we decide we want to replace, we do that at that time. This year we're looking at approximately about 120 sets. It's very expensive to do, but we're continually, weekly changing street names because of either them getting damaged or people breaking them and taking them. So I'll put this on, and then I put a bolt through to secure it to the post. There we go. And that's good, we're done. Dundas and Bruce Ave are now ready to go.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to move that the city plan recognize the Newcastle neighborhood as the
No,
original.
no, it was to move the delegation to, and then the motion will be
Thank you.
under
I'll
that.
move the
Thank you.
delegation, Chair.
Yes. That one, to move the delegation to there.
Right.
Yeah.
So to move the delegation ahead.
Yes.
Thank you.
Seconded by Councillor Bonner, all in favor? So just for those at home, our delegation will speak as integrated and emphasize moves in cultural, archaeological, and heritage will be moved in instead of waiting till the very end of the meeting. Thank you. And Ms. Balpal Singh, back to you.
Okay, welcome back, Council. We're just wrapping up that one section, and I think just pointing out to you that emergency management is its own specific section. This highlights everything we've heard from Council. It works with our climate mitigation and supports our ongoing work with hazard risk and vulnerability analysis and planning and prevention. So again, I think we've had feedback throughout this before we jump to the next section. And without further ado, unless there's any other comments on the emergency management side, I'd like to move us to the next section and hand over to our Parks, Recreation and Culture. So if that works, then it will be over to Mr. Harding to talk about community well-being.
Thank you, Chair. I won't speak too much, and Ms. Wark is here for this particular section, but just as there's a number of sections if we get through today that affect PRC or is part of PRC. And I know we've talked a lot about the integration of the plan, but just one more little bit about that is this really is the Parks, Recreation, Culture and Wellness Master Plan too with this document. And so probably some of those, typically a PRC Master Plan has some of those policy/actions in there. So if you've seen some of that language, it's probably PRC language that's part to deal with that. And with that, I know our staff have been looking at the draft and working at it a lot because it's actually our operational managers that are actually looking at it, and they'll definitely use all of this as they move forward in how they develop and provide services, particularly the recreation managers in this section. So I just want to say that again, this is that overall integrated approach, and you'll see PRC kind of popped up throughout the whole document, and again, down below. This one particularly is us looking at recreation and wellness, which I think we've met, particularly in this term of council, both Ms. Wark and I have talked to you more about how we view recreation as a wellness type of service, and we're moving more and more to recreation being a solution to health. And as even the worship talked about the preventative side of recreation and all that. So you'll see some of the recommendations in here cross over into a lot of that, as well as you'll see in here, while there is a lot and there may be some editing that's required, is we did try and take everything that we heard from the public, particularly the statistically significant survey. But as we went through, Ms. Balpal Singh went through in the engagement, we had hundreds of stakeholder meetings with many groups and organizations, and we feel a lot of those are in here in this section and in the following sections. So with that, I'll see if Ms. Wark had anything else to add to this, but would go similar to what Ms. Balpal Singh has done, if there's any questions on the actual policies of this section. Is that anything to add? Good.
Seeing none. Oh, he's there now. Councillor Geselbrecht.
Just comments on the PRC section. Yeah, I think Richard or Mr. Harding addressed this a little bit, but like there's just a few sections where teasing out, like they seem to be quite more specific actions. And so like just as an example, under City Recreation Wellness Facility C3621, building on the Reimagine Nanaimo process and information gathered, complete a needs assessment with recommendations for phased upgrading and adding of new indoor recreation facilities, including but not limited to ice sheets, gym space, racquetball, I don't know, that potentially could be.
Yeah, that's a good one. Actually, I wrote that one.
Great action.
Staff have questioned me on that one too, and I'll tell Council Chair if you don't mind, because as Council has heard from many different sport groups and user groups, they want to see where their next facility is going to be, and so we can't put that necessarily here, but it can be actioned out because there's a lot of priorities for Council on the recreation side, on the sports side, on the culture side, on a variety. So we want to show people that we're using the data that we got through the engagement, which is an incredible engagement process. It's in here. We need to then, as we come to Council, to start providing some of those facilities or those decisions for facilities that this would drive us to those kind of processes and how we can come back to you with more of a needs assessment side. So if you put money here, this many people may be served. If you put so much here, X may get some services, but nobody else. So this is where the integration of a PRC master plan and a city plan kind of comes together, and it's not always perfect yet. And we hope for either this edit, this draft, or the next edit will have some clarity with that, but we want to have something in there for people to see that we were hearing them.
And just to follow up, I think that, in terms of a process as well, it's been really useful to have the very long and everything added in plan, just to read through all the different policies. And one thing I did remark, there's quite a lot in the Parks and Recreation, a lot of intentionality and strategy and planning involved in that. So we don't want to lose all that, but yeah, we want to make sure that it's just in the right places. So thank you.
Mayor Krog.
Thank you very much, Chair, and I'll be very brief. I just want to say that sometimes the abundance of questions or the lack thereof is no reflection on the nature of the document, staff, or the report before us, and I just want to say I think you're headed in the right direction. I would put my big smiley face up if I had any technical ability to do so, so thank you.
Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Chair. Can't let you go without at least one question. I actually raised it earlier, but I'll raise it again, is C3.6.39, and it's advocate and provide support for programs to increase the percentage of secondary students who carry on to post-secondary. What does that look like, and what would an action item be for that type of thing, action plan?
Chair, Council Bonner, so it's under the community schools section, so it would be the aspect of us working with the school district on the community schools function, which under true community schools, there's recreation programs, there's sport programs, but there's also educational programs that can be offered to the community through different weekends, evenings, and such. I think it would be working with them on how do we provide those types of spaces. I think the project that we're working on to Tuxton, if the school has an educational component there, and we have some recreational components and some housing and some of the other objectives up to Tuxton, that would be an example of us working towards it. Maybe Ms. Bopolsing has another specific example.
Yeah, through the chair, I do agree with that. And I think what we're hitting up against is the word advocate, and whether that's more of an action-oriented statement to support a broader goal. This one speaks to the objectives of the school district and our partnerships with them, and what we can do within our mandate while not being an educational entity to support those outcomes. So again, but this one I think was flagged earlier as something that could be moved into an action, and I think that, again, like Councillor Gasselbarg and many of you pointed out, there are some things that we can go through and come back to maybe on May 9th and say, okay, here are some things, we're not going to lose them, but we can put them over in this area. So if that's something Council would like us to do as part of the broader piece, then I don't know if we need a motion for that, but
I literally did not bring it up for the word advocate. I was just curious as to what exactly that means and what would it look like, sort of thing. So I have no motions.
Thank you. Seeing no other speakers, Ms. Bopolsing.
Okay, so moving us on, very quick fun fact, and it's very easy, you've been given the answer already. When did Nanaimo get designated as an age-friendly community by the BC Ministry of Health?
2019.
Yes, you're correct. Okay, thank you. So I'm going to move through fairly quickly some of these that we went into more depth with you on February 14th, but just give you an opportunity to provide any comments. So the next section is our Goal 4, which is an empowered Nanaimo. So this includes things like the direction we were given at the outset of this process to look at truth and reconciliation through this plan, looking at equity and inclusivity, linking in with our advisory committee on inclusion and accessibility and inclusiveness, political voice and engagement, something we've heard throughout the process from council is important, access for all, culture, archaeological and heritage, public arts and programs, events, tournaments, parkland and park management, and waterfront use. And what you see here is a real blending in this section of all the different elements of both forward-looking planning, parks, recreation, culture, and looking at all the different elements that come under the Empowered Nanaimo goal as we've organized it. So I'm going to move through, and it will be integrated with parks, recreation, culture joining in. And this is one of those sections that could be done by many different departments. So you just happen to have me and Mr. Harding and Lynn here, but many different people could be doing this section. So in terms of reconciliation, if I can get the slides to work, maybe help from IT there. There we go. So the draft city plan, as you know, has a placeholder that we're working with Nanaimo on for territorial acknowledgement. We have a separate goal under Goal 4 for truth and reconciliation, but throughout the whole document, reconciliation is woven through.
I'm sorry, Chair, but I thought we were delegation up. Did I miss?
Not at this point.
Not at this point.
Through the chair, the delegation will join us at a specific section that relates to her comments. So I'm not going to go into it too much, but we've got the section on truth and reconciliation and related policies. But throughout the whole document, there are policies, whether it's in a Green Nanaimo, an Empowered Nanaimo, that speak to our partnerships and relationships with First Nations governments, particularly Nanaimo. So just some feedback. Are we on the right track? As I said, we went through this with you on the 14th in a bit more depth. So am I good to move on? Okay. So now I'm going to talk about equity and inclusion. And in the 2008 OCP, we had some light but moderate consideration of policies related to equity and inclusion. And then we also have other documents like our Health and Housing Action Plan, our Age-Friendly Nanaimo Plan. And while we have these, and then we have many ongoing actions that are being undertaken both by our legislated services in terms of accessibility to council information and our Parks, Recreation, and Culture Plan. So what we've done is we've taken all those elements, things that we've already endorsed, things that our different departments are already doing, whether it's like through a connected mobility, looking at equity in terms of access to different forms of transportation, our Parks, Recreation, and Culture, and we've leveraged that and put that in this particular section on equity and inclusion. But again, like most of the plan, underneath there are icons that show, for people who are interested in that aspect of the plan, where it's woven throughout the document as well as in a specific section. So this is the one section we also had the pleasure of working with the Provincial Accessibility Directorate, having them take a look through the language that we have here. And those of you who attended, I think Councillor Markman and Councillor Armstrong, the Accessibility and Inclusion Advisory Committee meeting last Wednesday, there are some motions that were put forward and some other recommendations that didn't come forward by motion. So if you wouldn't mind, we'll go through those now. So one of the recommendations that got made was under an inclusive Nanaimo specifically, and with specifically to look at specifically referencing gender. And so here's an example of a motion that was put forward, and it's a little bit hard to see for those watching online, but we have current wording that looks at what an inclusive Nanaimo does in terms of providing opportunities for active involvement for all. And at the very end, adding in, we put facilitates participation and interaction across cultures, orientations, ages, and abilities. And then the proposed wording is to add the word gender in there. So council can provide a motion to support that, and we would move that forward to May 9th for consideration.
Councillor Martman.
Yes, I'd like to move the recommendation from the committee.
Seconded, Councillor Hemmons. Any discussion, Councillor Martman?
It's very brief, but I think especially in today, we need to recognize genders and equality, and it needs to be consistent throughout the documentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no other.
Councillor,
Ms. Noble?
could we just have the slide go back one, and then we'll see the wording of the motion, please?
Oh.
So under the desired outcomes section there.
And did you want to move forward, Sky? So these show the actual.
Sure.
Okay. So the proposed wording is in the second paragraph and highlighted in red. I'm not sure if you can use the.
Seeing no discussion, I'll call the motion. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed, motion carries. Thank you.
And then another recommendation, though not made by motion, was to look at blending the definitions of inclusion and adding gender into that as well. Under that's the first one, and then the second one is looking at adding gender into universal design. So these weren't made by motion. However, they're things that we can look at through staff just bringing forward on May 9th for you, or you might wish to make a specific motion, but we may need to check because the definitions of inclusion we did run by the Accessibility Directorate to see if we're on the right track. And so what would be nice is if we could run by them the proposed wording and then come back to May 9th, particularly with number 1, not so much number 2. So it's up to council how you'd like to address this, but we would come back to May 9th, but having checked in with the Accessibility Directorate, because what the advisory committee and yourselves got in this document had been reviewed by them as part of us making sure that we could have city plan meet the requirements of the Accessibility Act. And there's just a little bit of difference in terms of how inclusion is looked at in terms of physical access versus inclusion from the perspective of culture, orientations, and genders. So maybe you'd like to.
Councillor Martman.
I'm through you, Chair. I'm wondering with the motion that we just passed, which looked for consistency in using gender as well as age and ability, for example, if we haven't already covered it under the universal design, because that was the point, was to make sure we added gender to it. So is that not covered in the first motion, which said consistency?
That's what I would think.
I think through the chair, I think yes for the term gender, but there are a few other changes. So I think that we're covered there, but there was a couple other motions.
So it's the inclusion that you will come back to us on May 9th with a clear definition. Thank you.
Seeing no other speakers, we'll wait for that on the 9th. Thank you.
Okay. And the other recommendations I think we can come back to you with on May 9th. So one is to clarify what's meant by a statistically valid survey, and we can do that through the glossary. So again, all of these different pieces of feedback I think we can address nicely for you and come forward with options on May 9th.
Thank you.
Okay, so with that, I'm going to move forward on to the next discussion, which is political voice and engagement. So right now in our current OCP, there's no specific section on that. And so through Reimagine and our terms of reference, we actually looked at the IAP principles of engagement and then also referenced back to the Citizens Engagement Task Force. And in fact, the Get Involved site is actually something that speaks directly to that online alternatives to citizen engagement, as well as other pieces in that work that was done. So this section here links to equity and inclusion and well-being, and it puts ongoing practices into policy.
Excuse me, Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Chair. Sort of going back to the last item there, having read through all of that, it doesn't really address the elephant in the room, if I may, in that we don't have a society that is all-inclusive, that all genders have equal opportunity. It talks about these are great things, but it actually doesn't say, and by the way, we're not there yet. Is that worth putting into the part of it, that we recognize that society is not equal, it does not give equal opportunities to different genders, marginalized groups, that sort of thing? Would that be put in a city plan like that, to recognize the fact that it isn't?
I guess through the chair, it could be. The way we've approached it is to, I guess, look forward and say this is what we're wanting to achieve, but we can acknowledge in the preamble, if that's what council would like, an acknowledgement that yes. And I think one of the reasons that we in fact have this section is because we aren't there yet. So we'll take direction from council how they like it addressed. I mean, right now what we've got is equity recognizes each person has different circumstances and allocates resources and opportunities to support more outcomes for all, regardless of age, ability, gender, orientation, faith practice, ancestry, or background. So there is that preamble there.
Yeah, and it's kind of, to me, it's a sort of watered down thing, right? Where you could easily say that in a society where all of these problems are fixed, and you said, on the good side, this is how it was done. To me, it's trying to recognize the fact that we are not in a society where all these things are fixed, and this draft is going to help us get there. It's just beefing up the stronger language, as has been talked about before, to make a commitment, I think. And I don't have any wording for it. I just noticed as I was reading through it, it really didn't address it, even though it talks about it, sort of. So I'll work on something.
Okay, seeing no other speakers, Ms. Paulsing.
Okay, thank you. So thank you, Councillor Bonner. And then on to political voice, basically letting you know that currently we don't have anything drafted in our current OCP, and we have a dedicated section to that in the city plan. And the desired outcomes you've got before you, and it's about having a more informed and aware community, and also looking at that equity lens of political engagement with our community. And you'll notice that we have, while we have this section, again, we have other sections that link to it. And so, for example, the intergenerational and age-friendly and equity and inclusivity, those two sections also speak to community engagement and political voice, particularly for those who have been marginalized. So just wanted to check in with you about having that specific section, any comments you have about it before we move on to the next.
Yeah, seeing none, go ahead.
Okay. So now we've got community well-being and access for all. And again, we have policies in many existing documents that speak to equitable access, whether it's our 2005 PRC Master Plan, the 2014 Transportation Master Plan, Trail Implementation Plan. This is what we're currently doing. Then we have many ongoing projects that this council has endorsed, like our accessible and inclusive playground, phases 1 and 2 at Maffeo Sutton. You've actually seen it through for the completion of the first phase. We've got things like the Georgia Greenway, other things that look at adaptive and accessible amenities that we provide. And then we also have a study underway on adaptive and accessible housing that we hope to get some direction on. And in the draft city plan, we're taking that a step further and integrating those existing directions, carrying them forward, and taking the new ones into consideration. And Access for All does also link to that intergenerational living and age-friendly. And through this, we're aiming to, and as I've mentioned, we've had the attention that we're grateful for from the province on how we meet the BC Accessibility Act that we'll be required to do in September. So through this, we feel fortunate that we're ahead of the game. compared to other municipalities who are just catching up. We were already en route with that when they brought this legislation in. And so here is our section on that. And, you know, the desired outcomes is that there are many ways for people of all ages and abilities to move freely throughout our city and without barriers, and that's what we're aiming for. And also to access the services that we provide and public spaces. So again, just checking with you that this specific section works for you, and any comments or questions that you have.
Councillor Botter.
Thank you, Chair. The section works for me. I do have a question, though. I'm taking a course on EPUB documents and specifically born accessible documents. And these are documents that are created at the very base level that are available on any type of device for any person with any type of reading abilities. And so I'm wondering, are our documents born accessible or even close?
Good point.
Through the chair, that's an excellent question. And I might take a little nod towards Ledge Services. I would say that we have come in leaps and bounds in terms of adapting, and where we get feedback from, actually we're lucky to have the ACA committee, because we have had one member in particular who has helped us actually with when we were doing phase 2, and we actually had the complexities of putting up things like maps and things that are very visual, and for somebody who is sight impaired, communicating that in a workshop. And we were fortunate to get some guidance on how we could actually verbally explain a visual map so that a broader number of people could participate. Now that's a little bit different than what you're explaining, but what we do have is access to tools that allow for the translation for those who are either hearing or sight impaired to access technology through the actual federal and provincial government when somebody requests it, that we can actually enable their participation for documents that they can't see online. Now, in terms of what we provide online, we have, and we do provide ways that we can do that. Now, I'm now being pressed to specifically say what they are, but one of the things that we learned from you fairly early on was about use of colors and being careful around use of colors for people who have visual impairments or have alternate ways of seeing color. So these are things that are checks and balances for us. And I think that actually even just through this process and conversations with council and the committee, we've stepped that up. And I think that what the policies provide is for us to continue to do that. And if you're learning anything through your course that you'd like to share with us, I think we'd be quite grateful.
And I could. One of the main things we pulled out of this course is that if the documents are designed at the very first place, and designed right, then they're exportable to basically any type of format. That would be including image descriptions, which describe complicated images such as maps and graphs, or just regular images that are so it's just, I'm thinking it's something we should be cognizant of, that this is something we need to go down when we start designing our documents.
Yeah. And actually, I kind of have a fun fact, which actually has some of the things that we are doing. So I'm going to wait and see if maybe you can guess a couple of them, and then I'll read out a couple other things that we're doing.
Okay.
Just.
All right. Great. Now I gotta
Thank you,
test.
Councilor Botter. Ms. Bullpulsing.
Okay. So this section here is looking at culture, archaeology, archaeological and heritage. And in the existing OCP, we have a section that includes archaeology under the Goal 3 Livable Community. And then we have a range of existing practices that are in keeping with the province's mandate to identify and maintain, monitor, and make sure that ourselves and developers follow archaeological guidelines. So we carry that forward in the city plan, along with policies for heritage, and then we have taken that a step further to link that to reconciliation and equity and inclusion and placemaking and prosperity. And so this is the section as it sits here, and it talks more about, it takes a step forward from what we had in the previous OCP, and then I think we are going to, after this section, speak in a bit more depth about this with one of our delegations and some changes that they might like to propose. So under archaeological and heritage, we continue with the intent to protect heritage, and then again leveraging wording that we had, taking it to a higher level around our work with Nanaimo First Nation and First Nations on collaborating relating to sites of importance beyond archaeology and looking at heritage in a broader perspective. So
Thank you. If we could just pause, and Ms. Mitchell, if you would like to take the podium, please, you'll have 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, and thank you for letting us talk at the subject that we really want to talk about today. I certainly applaud you for getting your way through this tome. It would have, I'm sure, brought lesser stock people to their knees with this 304-page document. I've been through a lot of official plans in my planning life, and this is the biggest one yet, so I think you should be proud of that too. But today I'm really here on behalf of Newcastle residents as a member of the Newcastle Community Association to talk about the heritage section and what we would like to suggest to add to that section. I think, as I pointed out to you in a draft email that we sent along, and we also met with staff a couple of weeks ago to talk about a number of things that we're interested in the plan, including heritage, that although the plan rightfully protects the heritage aspects of downtown and the Old City Quarter, it really doesn't deal at all with Newcastle. And I think any of those who know the history of Newcastle, we've been around a long time. We were on the map in 1891. Our site actually was one of the original villages of the Nanaimo, and was one of the reasons that they received quite a large compensation package from the city, from the federal government, was that that village was never turned into property for them. So we have that going back that far. And obviously the built heritage that's there now is really since the turn of the century. And about 16%, for example, of our residential buildings was actually built before 1930. So Newcastle's not just a place you drive through to the ferry. It's full of heritage, it's full of historic buildings, it's full of character of its own because of its own history. And it's not that we don't want development in our community. We've got lots of development. We're the densest community actually in Nanaimo as it is now. But there are certain aspects of our community that we really want protected, and we feel that in the same vein as the Old City Quarter and downtown has, we have just as many resources in our community that we feel need, at least for people to understand that if you're going to infill, it has to be sensitive to the heritage nature of the community. So we proposed that, that a new point be added to this particular section that recognizes the Newcastle neighborhood as the original location of an important Nanaimo village, as well as containing built heritage sites dating back to when the city of Nanaimo was established, and ensure that infill in this heritage area is sensitive and mindful of its historic character. Now, given the discussion that you had earlier, is this a strategic policy direction, or is it an action item? And I guess from my perspective as a strategic planner and a professional planner, this is a policy direction. This is really saying to the community that we understand that Newcastle, like the Old City Quarter and the downtown, has a resource that needs to be recognized and preserved. And we're also already in our neighborhood plan. Our neighborhood plan talks about how important it is to us. The city's own brochure on a walk through time says this has got, I think the quote is, that we, something about the beautiful and the gracefulness of heritage buildings in Newcastle. So for all these reasons, we think that it would be important for you to include this particular motion at this particular time in this document. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Mitchell. Any questions for Ms. Mitchell? Councillor Martman.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. So just so for clarification, understanding, you mentioned that the document mentions Old City Quarter?
Yes, it does say in the section, those sections are not included on what you see in front of you. You have to look in the document to see that they're missing.
I'm trying to find it.
It's all on page, whatever the same page is. It's
I've got that. I see the downtown Fitzwilliam Street corridor, which has a heritage conservation area.
Right. And there is a whole land use designation for the Old City that in fact gives reference to its historic area and also to the downtown.
Okay.
If you look on your land use map, every blue, all the blue is the Old City.
Okay, I'll ask a question further of staff later. Thank you.
Any other questions for Ms. Mitchell? Councillor Turley?
Thank you, Chair. Actually, I have a question for staff.
It's for staff.
Can you wait till we're finished with the
Yeah, I can wait,
delegation,
yeah.
please? Thank you. Councillor Gesselbrook for the delegation.
Just a comment. I just wanted to thank the delegation on the email. It's probably more history of the area that I've ever received on Newcastle. So thank you for that background. It was quite interesting.
Well, we have just actually launched our community association website, and on there, there's the history of the birdhouse, which is at 461 Vancouver, and there's another 13 that the heritage. It's really a genealogy of the house, not just it's the story of all the families who lived that. And that particular house, for example, was built for the manager of the Bank of Commerce, which of course used to be in the National Land Building. And so there were at least about 4 or 5 people who lived in that house on Vancouver Avenue who were also bank managers for the Bank of Commerce. And that's one of the the genealogies of the heritage houses that we put together. There's another 13 that are ready just for me to put pictures in and put them online. So if you want to know something about Newcastle, you just have to go to newcastlecommunityassociation.ca and it's all there.
Cool. Thank you.
Mayor Krog?
Thank you very much, Chair. And I must tell you that the firm I articled with in 1979, Strongitharm Curry, they were solicitors for the Bank of Commerce, and Ted pointed out to me, Ted Strongitharm, that was the Bank of Commerce's manager's house and had been for a very, very long time. I appreciate it. I want to ask something quite practical. I know you bring real expertise to this. You're here talking about policy today, but what would you see us doing specifically that would meet your goals and desires for the neighborhood? Something very concrete, practical that I can understand.
Some urban guidelines design guidelines for a heritage area, I think would be a very useful action item. And there's lots of design guidelines that are included in the neighborhood plan now in terms of if you're going to infill, then the project should have eyes on the street. It should be stepped back. It should be in conjunction with whatever's happening on the street so that it doesn't stick out like a sore thumb but blends in. So those kind of urban design guidelines are things that can be done in an action perspective.
Yeah, thank you. Councillor Bonner?
Thank you, Chair. Through you to our delegation. Further to that comment, there's a number of new or newer apartment buildings on the, I guess, the south end of the neighborhood there. Would you say those would meet a policy that you'd like to see done?
There's one, is it the one that used to be next to the Travel Lodge? That's a new one. Most of the apartments in our community were built actually before there was an official plan. There's only one apartment building that actually has been built since then. But the ones that have met with the height limits and certainly have fit in with the character of the area, that's fine. We came to you, I think, with one particular project that did not meet the character of the area. It was a design that's been shopped around the city, and it was trying to be force-fitted into a 60-foot by 100-foot lot, and that doesn't work. And we've got a couple of projects already now on Stewart Avenue and one on Terminal Avenue that we've met as a community association and really like the way they've dealt with it. And it fits the perfect character of the community, one being the station, which is on Terminal Avenue, and the other one being a 3 or 4 story one that spreads from Stewart through to Newcastle. So it can be done. It absolutely can be done. It just takes the will of a policy to say this is where you start from, not where you end up.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Mitchell. I appreciate the time you took to come and share your thoughts with us.
Thank you.
Councillor Turley for staff.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So the mention in Ms. Mitchell's note about Snamo having a former village there and providing recognition. My only question is, well, she's twofold. A, have Snamo been asked, or have they asked to have this recognition? Because I'm a little concerned about assuming that we know what their wishes are without hearing them if we haven't heard.
Okay.
Ms. Poppelson?
Through the chair, you'll notice on page 130, we have a policy 4.6.5, which involves wording about working with First Nations and others to identify and recognize areas of cultural and heritage significance. And while we do know that this is one of several village sites, we haven't specifically asked them about mentioning this one in the plan. That being said, we do know that they are currently reviewing the wording that we put forward and are going to be getting back to us with comments. And so we can actually put forward, if council makes a motion, forward that to them for consideration. But we do have quite a few different policies that speak to working with Snamo around signage, recognition, protection, acknowledgement of different sites. And so in the absence of having that direction, we have that wording that supports those conversations. But in response to this specific one, no, we haven't put that forward to them because we're waiting for their feedback.
They haven't put it forward to us, right? My question was more to do with, have they asked specifically for it, not that we've asked?
Oh, through the chair, no, they have not asked specifically for this.
Thank you.
Councillor Gesselbrook?
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, just a question to staff, just trying to think through this. So there are heritage designations within the OCP, like the Old City Quarter and then the downtown have that designation. I don't see the Old City Quarter mentioned specifically in this policy section. The only one I see is downtown. I do see a policy that says broaden the focus of heritage to include areas beyond downtown, which would be very broad catch-all for other places like Newcastle. I'm just curious, like, in terms of other locations downtown that have the same age as the Newcastle neighborhood or in that area, I mean, there's a downtown Old City Quarter. Are there other parts of the city that would be in a similar situation as the Newcastle neighborhood, or is it basically kind of been left out in terms of being lumped in with the Old City Quarter and downtown?
Through the chair to Councillor Gesselbrook, what we do have with the Old City neighborhood, as Ms. Mitchell pointed out, is a specific land use designation, and it's on page 208, and it basically does recognize within that designation the unique heritage values of that neighborhood, and supports the preservation of architecturally and historically significant buildings. And so that section recognizes the highest, I guess, density of protected or buildings that we have on the Heritage Register, for example. And then throughout the city, there may be other individual buildings, but they're not specifically to a wide neighborhood, if that's correct. Sorry.
Okay, thanks.
Councillor Thorpe?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And I recognize there's no motion on the floor at this point, but to a comment through you, to a comment Ms. Bhopal Singh just referenced, which I recall it was in either phase 1 or phase 2 of Reimagine, and this topic came to council for their feedback. And Old City Quarter's heritage uniqueness was mentioned. And I recall at the time that I made a comment that, yes, I agree with that, but there are other neighborhoods in our city that also have unique heritage features. And in fact, I think I pulled Newcastle as an example out of the air at that time. So I understand where Ms. Mitchell is coming from with her request. But I guess to build on that same thought, aside from the SFN connection, which I acknowledge, if we're talking about heritage and culture buildings in the history of our city, then I'm sure that beyond the Old City Quarter, beyond Newcastle area, other areas of the city would want to step forward as well and say, well, wait a minute, our South End has a very rich cultural heritage. My grandparents lived on Halliburton when my grandfather worked for the coal mine. And others would say, well, wait a minute, what about the Rose Hill Brecon area, where my mother attended Brecon Elementary, the original elementary school? And others would say, well, what about where as the city grew north, what about the Long Lake area where the Wellington Community Hall is, and that area, which has some real distinctive houses, or had. And then south of the city as well, we could point to Chase River and Extension, which has a great wealth of heritage and culture. So, and again, I realize there's no motion on the floor, and I want to support the Newcastle Association, but I'm wondering if we're sort of cherry picking rather than having a general policy that says we recognize when there are historical, cultural, what's the word?
Buildings of
Historic, cultural buildings, whatever, that we want to acknowledge that and make sure that any infill or new building is done appropriately and thoughtfully, not just for one area, but for the many that might share the same concern. So I just throw that out there as my thought on this. Thank you.
Councillor Bonner?
Thank you. Just a little technical thing. In C 4.6.10, we have the word Mistinmok, and it's mentioned 4 times in this document. 2 times it has the word peoples after it, which is the translation roughly, and 2 places it doesn't. So could we put it in those other 2, and everybody will be happy? Thanks.
Councillor Hemmons?
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to make the motion asked by the delegation. So I'm going to move that the city plan recognize the Newcastle neighborhood as the original location of an important Nanaimo village, as well as containing built heritage sites dating back to when the city of Nanaimo was established, and ensure that all infill in this heritage area is sensitive and mindful to its historic character.
The seconder, seconded Councillor Bonner. Further discussion, Councillor Hemmons?
Thanks. I think we've had lots of good conversation on this. I am curious about Councillor Thorpe's question. I don't want to create a precedent where we are superseding other neighborhoods coming forward who have the same sense as Newcastle does. So I'd love some comment on that, and I'd like to get it on the floor so we can debate it. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Mortman.
Ms. Bulpett-Singh going to respond? Or?
Not that I saw.
Okay. I'm not sure if we really need a motion. I'm looking at under C 4.6.5. It actually states encourage the protection of individual heritage properties using heritage conservation covenants, heritage revitalization agreements, heritage impact assessments, financial assistance incentives, and other available tools. And that's kind of a broad statement for all of Nanaimo, because I concur with Councillor Thorpe. I'm concerned. I don't even know if we have to recognize downtown. I'm thinking that we recognize those areas within our city that have those individual heritage properties that have value, and we take that into consideration. And I think this council and other councils would look to the neighborhoods to see if there's development going, how we are impacting heritage, period. So that's my 2 cents.
Councillor Turley?
Thank you, Chair. I agree with Councillor Thorpe about we do not want to be cherry picking, and I bring back my previous comment. I think it's premature to be doing a motion like this that includes Nanaimo, because they, according to staff, have not asked for this, and I don't want to be in a situation by looking like we're telling what they should do or should not do. I think it needs to come from them, and not via this motion to them. Thank you.
Councillor Brown?
Thanks, Madam Chair. I'm going to support this motion. One, I think with the question around Nanaimo, there's a dialogue to happen just in general with the plan, and the city has been having that, so I think that can be addressed through there. I think this motion is general enough that it provides that direction to staff to have that conversation where appropriate and when it's good with other items that I think we definitely want feedback on through the plan and respecting them as a nation. But with respect to the general heritage, I do think this neighborhood is one worthy of looking at some of the additional tools that are available through the development process, or refining some of those tools through the development process, like that has been done in the OCQ. There, for example, there might be some tweaks that can be made with respect to development permit areas and things like that. And I think it's important for council to remember that if you have very generalized development permit areas, then that is what's going to be presented to council, and council must approve them. It's not a discretionary approval if they meet those development guidelines. So if there is the ability to have a little bit of tailoring with respect to the look and feel for some of the multifamily, I think that's totally appropriate through the development permit process, and give council, or if it's delegated to staff for approval to sort of work with the developer and make sure that intention is met. So I fully support this motion, and I'm thankful for the delegation bringing it forward, the community bringing it forward, and also for Councillor Hemmons putting it on the table. Thank you.
Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Chair. I support this motion also. I think the difference between this motion and what Councillor Martman has suggested is the quote you mentioned, properties. And this is a motion about a neighborhood, and the neighborhood itself is more than just the sum of its properties. It's the entire neighborhood that I think is looking to be preserved here, and then its look and feel. So that's why I think it's important to name it. I would invite other neighborhoods to come forward, and we have sort of lots of time between now and when we would decide to finalize this. And do that. I can tell you my neighborhood's not coming forward. They're leveling houses like there's no tomorrow up there, and it's just fine. But we're not I don't live in an area like Newcastle where it does have much more of a history. So I'm very much in support of this. And again, I believe it's because the neighborhood is more than just the individual houses, properties in it. So,
Seeing no other speakers, I'll speak. I too agree with the motion. I think it's very important. I think we have a group of people that spent a lot of time researching this, doing this. They took their own initiative to come here just like anybody else could. So if as Councillor Thorpe said, if there's other neighborhoods that are concerned, then they need to be here too. That's how I look at that, and it can be addressed. So I'm in favor of that. As to the point about SFN, I think the important thing to recognize with that's already been recognized provincially. So SFN has already been acknowledged that. So I don't have any concerns about SFN. I think, as a matter of fact, SFN would probably be very appreciative of the fact that we're acknowledging their traditional territories. So I don't have a big issue with that myself, especially as previous councils have acknowledged it. This one hasn't, but previous have, as well as the province. So I'm very much in favor of the motion, and I would like to thank Ms. Mitchell and her group for doing all the work that they did. It's very great. Thank you. So seeing no other speakers, I'll call the question. All in favor? And seeing anybody opposed? Seeing Councillor Turley opposed, motion carries. Thank you. Did you want to speak again?
No, it's okay.
Sorry. It comes up late.
Okay, so moving forward and then back slightly. I had mentioned culture, but really glossed over it, and I was going to give more time to PRC to speak to some of those elements. But again, this is one of the pieces where we have a specific piece that ties us in more strongly to our work with Nanaimo First Nation and also other cultures, and looking at what opportunities we have and what we're currently doing in this area. And you'll see it does also relate to culture in terms of identity, and culture in a different aspect to arts and culture. But there is still a linkage, and I just wanted to acknowledge that. And so you'll see that this is an important part of who we are as a city. It plays into our land uses in the downtown area. And it's part of also that inclusion and diversity and looking at culture from that broader perspective. So we have this section here, and then after archaeological and heritage, we also have the look at arts, culture, programs, and events. So I'm going to hand over to Parks, Recreation, and Culture for this section, and off you go. Thank you.
Actually, send it over to Lynn, actually, on this one.
Hi, hi, thank you. So similar to all the other sections in the plan, in the art, culture, program, and events section, there have been policies and recommendations taken from the old plans and ported over into the new city plans. So anything that was incomplete or ongoing has been put in city plan as a policy. And also there's been the integration of some policies around community events, tournaments, and gatherings based on the feedback that was heard from the public. And then, of course, just adding the whole lens of well-being and reconciliation and equity and inclusion and placemaking and prosperity around these topics. And if you look specifically at the public art policies, those policies have been created to support the integration of public art throughout the community and to make public art accessible and help to create a sense of identity for the city. And then the policies specifically around community events, tournaments, festivals, and gatherings are policies that help to support an animated and lively public realm that provide a variety of different event types that are open to all and celebrate culture, sport, and art, and those kinds of things. Any feedback on those policies?
Not seeing any, thank you.
So on this one with parkland management, again, another integrated one throughout. You'll see aspects from the recreation side, the culture side, the public art, the land use side. Again, as we saw throughout the engagement, which wasn't a surprise to us, parks and open space was highly valuable to the residents. And you'll see a number of policies of continuing to enhance, expand, improve upon some of our parks and open space. One thing we did see a bit is that people are seeing more that our parks are well used and sometimes overly used, and so they're sometimes looking a little tired and they need a little more attention, some of the things that we've been hearing. So again, if there's any questions on any particular policy or direction or aspect that we've put in the draft document, we're here to answer any questions.
Not seeing any, thank you. Oh, Councillor Bonner's up now. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. When we first, I think is when we were first elected, someone made a presentation to us regarding accessibility to the parks, mobility issues, wheelchairs, that sort of thing. And I sort of agreed where if we have a park, then it should be accessible to everyone, regardless of whatever abilities they have. So are we making headway on that? And will this document increase that, our ability to create parks that are accessible to more people?
Chair, Councillor Bonner, also the two chairs of the ASA committee can also speak to that. I think we bring a lot of our park plans and designs to ASA, which is, again, as Ms. Bopal-Singh said, through the process have been very helpful. That committee has been very helpful to the PRC department in identifying some specific areas. And there are some other projects and that other community groups are working on now of different accessible trails and of course the playgrounds that we're working on. We know we can't make every trail and every park 100% accessible, but there's different ways of accessibility too that we're finding. It's not just wheelchair accessibility, but there's other ways of making people feel safe and welcome in those parks too. Is what we're trying to find different ways. Not sure if that answers your question specifically, but I think with the one committee that council's put in place, we've definitely utilized a lot to help make our parks and our facilities more inclusive and accessible.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Councillor Martman.
I just wanted to respond to Councillor Bonner. This is a topic that comes up at the Accessibility and Inclusivity Committee. And it was with great pleasure that we saw the opening of the trail in Bowen Park that is completely accessible. So, thank you.
Seeing no other speakers, Mr. Harding? No, Ms. Bulpel-Singh?
Through the chair, Councillor Bonner, on page 124, and it was, again, this integration where I covered off the section C 4.4 and access to all. You'll see that some of the parks, recreation facilities, and recreation programs, we have specific policies in that section about accessibility and providing some of the opportunities to our recreation physical facilities and also our natural and other types of parks. And so in there you'll see the intentions in the policies there that I think speak to what you're hoping to achieve.
Mr. Harding?
That in the, your,
Oh, sorry, I see Councillor Geselbrecht. Sorry, my apologies.
Great. Just general again, and this is for the section earlier as well, just like editing for things that might be quite action-oriented stuff. So just I think the whole park section we could probably do with that. There's one here I think in the earlier one on community events, and that was 4.810. Consider providing annual funding to assist groups in the production and growth of community events and gatherings. Seemed pretty action-oriented. Yeah. But also much good stuff in there. So thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Council, you have been extremely patient with us today. The fun fact today actually relates to a question I felt I didn't answer very well for Councillor Bonner, and that was around what are the different things we have done as a city to make our documents and information more accessible to the community. And so I feel a bit bad asking you for some of those, but can you, if you wanted to throw out a couple of things that we've been doing a bit differently, including under your term, to make things more accessible for all members of the community, feel free to.
Councillor Geselbrecht.
I think there's more pictures and graphs and things.
Yep. So more, and actually this document, one reason that it's so visual is so it can speak to a range of different ways of taking in information and knowledge, which is one form of accessibility.
I'm just cognizant of time. Perhaps we could move on because we still have another 10
Absolutely.
pages. Thank you.
Okay, so now we have Mr. Corson, not last but least, and Mr. McKay, who are going to speak about Goal 5, which is the last of our 5 goals, a prosperous Nanaimo.
Great, thanks, Council. I have a 1-hour presentation for you.
I guess you got 40 minutes though.
Perfect, I'll use every minute. No, I'll keep it quick. Lisa, can I borrow the pointer, please? Great, so yeah, so I know most of you have looked at the plan, and in the Prosperous Nanaimo section, we have these 6 areas we've broken it into. And this is all based on the same themes of integration and kind of broadening the scope of what we do. I think from an economic development perspective, what's kind of interesting in this plan is that quite often we've looked at kind of ECDEV as kind of policies and programs. In here, you've taken some really strong actions on land use. So you've identified the fact you had a shortage of industrial land. In your land use section of the plan, you've identified all of Ocean View to help expand that area. That's a really big move, but doesn't come across necessarily in the ECDEV section or the prosperity section. I think also the really interesting thing about this ECDEV or prosperous section is the whole idea of the equity inclusion, which really is kind of driven this area as opposed to just being about kind of the prosperous section being targeted to a few businesses. It's really about the whole community. So those are some of the, what I actually would call quite big moves from an economic development perspective. The 6 goal areas are really based on the 2020 ECDEV strategy that the Economic Development Task Force put together. and were reformatted and repurposed for Reimagine Nanaimo and the city plan. So some of the programs in the city plan from the ECDEV strategy are actually in other areas of the plan. So it's kind of embedded throughout the document. So in terms of economic capital, this was the ECDEV task force and our stakeholders recognizing that there's no point marketing a community if you don't have the infrastructure in place. And so this whole section is about making sure we have a strong downtown core and waterfront, that we have appropriately zoned land, that we have a hospital campus that gives us the care we need, and we're taking advantage of our natural location and existing infrastructure. For example, like the logistics hub that's forming at Duke Point. A section that we don't have a slide for it, but a really important section in this is the human, social, and environmental capital, which is in your document. And in there we talk about developing a skilled and talented workforce. We talk about the circular economy and being much more inclusive. We talk about policies that actually look at making sure the labor force skill sets match current and future demand. We talk about childcare and the need for a diverse workforce and a green economy. So certainly those are policies that you wouldn't typically see in an ECDEV strategy, but as part of the city plan, very much embedded in the prosperous section, because we recognize those are important tools. The business development section on this slide focuses on making sure that we focus on our existing business community and help them be successful before we start looking at attraction of other industry. So these are policies that focus on us working collaboratively, sharing data and resources, making sure that we're competitive versus other communities. We have some interesting policy in here on the donut, which was embedded into this early, and I think that kind of ties back to the Mayor's Task Force as well, the work we're doing on donut awareness. The next section we talked about was innovation and technology, and I think in the past we focused on very specific initiatives. Here we're looking at growing a strong tech sector and moving towards being recognized as a smart city. And certainly any questions you have on the smart city side of things, Mr. Mackay can help us on that for sure. And then really kind of the typical ECDEV stuff, which is the business attraction stuff that we see quite a lot of, is in this area. And this is where we work on a positive business climate, which you've been doing through the development approvals review process. We talk about the positive image of Nanaimo, which is one of those issues that's been around for 10, 20 years now. But really, I think one of our strengths and playing to that will be going forward our relationship with Snuneymuxw and Snohomish and the opportunity to develop those partnerships. And then in the last section, in tourism, kind of builds on the work, again, Council's been doing on the tourism working group and moving towards setting up the tourism society. So making sure we have enough hotel rooms, we have product, the work we've been doing on the business and tourism marketing. Those are all key policies that are in here. And that's my section. Thank you.
Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Chair. Going back to a few of these, I'm looking at C 5.4.4. That's innovation and technology stuff. And it literally says, build the innovation ecosystem for the technology sector, utilizing innovation in the technology sector to strengthen and grow other sectors of the economy. What does that mean? And I'm a technology guy, sort of, right?
Through the chair, I don't think you're supposed to catch us with jibber jabber, are you? Yeah. That might require a bit of refinement on our part.
Okay.
Thank you. Brian, did you have
through the chair to Councillor Bonner, the way I see it is that we can build a vibrant technology cluster where some are developing software, some are developing green and clean tech devices, horizontally integrated, that can have a big spin-off effect for the community.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Okay. My other question, if I may, going back to manufacturing, industrial, and things along those lines, as we develop our donut economy and circular economy, it's quite possible that we may be using less and less imported goods, hopefully, right? And we become more self-reliant as an economy. Are we able to pivot when in the event that those happen so that we can encourage more small-scale manufacturing in some of our areas that may not necessarily be industrial areas? And I'm going to give you a weird example. I'm looking at the possibility of creating books, like hand-bound books, basic hardcover books, that sort of thing, which is basically manufacturing in a small scale. So do we have the ability to encourage more of that type of development that is catering to more of our needs here? Not that hardbound books is a need here, but something along those lines?
Yeah, through the chair to Councillor Bonner. So to me, that's really a land use discussion, and I think in that we always look at the impacts and the scale of the business. I mean, that could be a home-based business, to be honest with you, at the current situation. It would just depend as to, once you started generating traffic impacts or more employees, then you would have to switch that over to a more of a commercial zone. But I think what's interesting is when you have the larger land parcels, you want to try to keep them larger. It's very hard to take smaller pieces and consolidate those. So as businesses, as the economy transitions, you have the opportunity to maybe take some of the bigger pieces and start chopping those down for specific uses that might tie in with the circular economy. Because I think when, as we start looking at, if we looked at Duke Point as an eco-industrial park, or looking at how we can tie in some of the recycling initiatives and stuff like that, you're going to want those proximity issues, right? So maybe your book is actually in a zone, right, that actually has other adjacent uses that tie into it nicely.
So would like corridor zoning, would something like that be up? Like not even just books, but like say a person wants to start developing a product that we can use in all the restaurants as a takeaway dish instead of plastic. Like they actually done that in Victoria. It's a company that's doing that.
It's already here.
Do we need to stick them out in Duke Point, or can they actually work here in Nanaimo?
Through the chair to Councillor Bonner, I think we have some of probably the most innovative, like light industrial developments on Vancouver Island that you have in Boxwood and in the Metro area. So Metro and Boban and stuff like that. So I think that those are the areas we'd like to encourage more of. You have the East Wellington lands that are going to come on eventually. That's where I think you'd see those type of activities take place.
Okay.
Yeah.
Councillor Giselbrecht?
I think that was just following up on that is just, I think like, I was reading somewhere about smaller, like much lighter footprint industrial manufacturing activities that are going to be able to happen on a smaller scale, and just for municipalities to keep up with that and have flexible land use designations that, because they've got a less of a footprint in traffic, and that can operate more in urban centers with, I think it's a flexible light industrial designation. And I think that we already have that potentially, or we're looking at including that.
Yeah, through the chair to Councillor Giselbrecht, yeah, you do, and I think I also think the Boxwood area is probably one of the most innovative areas because it has the broadest range of uses, and you see such a range of uses in there. Quite a diverse employment lands, as we'd call it. Yeah.
And I guess a question just following up on that: are we seeing it all in other municipalities where that type of, because of not as much industrial land, even if it's light industrial, where these uses have a much lighter footprint, that there's pressure on sort of larger commercial areas that are designated as commercial to sort of allow for that type of activity if it meets a certain requirement in terms of, a footprint that could fit into what that designation would be.
Yeah, through your worship, Councillor Giselbrecht, so I have noticed some of the kind of the power centers where the large retailer leaves, like a Beaver Lumber or Home Hardware or something leaves. You see those uses starting to turn over to more of a light industrial use when it was traditionally a commercial use. But those big box stores kind of provide that ability to be parceled up, and there's a lot of variety that can happen there.
Okay.
Yeah, I've seen that in quite a few communities.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Councillor Thorpe.
Thank you, Chair. Through you, first of all, my apologies. I am going to have to leave in about 5 minutes if we're not done. But I wanted to, through you, thank Mr. Corson. To me, this is an, I don't want to say it's the most, but maybe I will say that, the most important section in this entire document. And I find that too often we shunt, in my opinion, we shunt talking about economic matters to the end of the agenda, as in fact this is. And I heard a great quote the other day, which I'll take the opportunity to pass along, and it went like this, if I can recall it. If you want to get to be carbon neutral, you first of all need to be cash positive. And when I heard that, I thought it makes a lot of sense.
It's so true.
And people are welcome to write that down. Just give me credit for it. But unless we have a thriving, healthy economy in our city, then we can't do all of the good things that we want to do in the area of whether it's arts and culture or environment or social programs or whatever. And sometimes I feel that growth in terms of business and commerce and even industry is looked upon as something bad. And in my book, it's not. It has to be done responsibly, but we need that growth, we need that business, we need those tax dollars to fund all of the programs that we want to use in our city. So I'm really glad that we've got this section in here. I hope it's treated importantly by the citizens that respond to it, and I thank you for your efforts on that.
Councillor Martman.
Thank you. Through the chair, I agree. A prosperous Nanaimo and its success, whether it's environment or social responsibility, comes from having a prosperous economy. However, I think what we have to be cautious with or aware of is what type of economy do we want to grow, right? And so I look at that type of conversation of it's not business for the sake of business, but the right type of business that meets all the needs and the environment. So, thank you.
Councillor Bonner.
If I love the quote, and it makes sense. I'd tweak it a bit and say we need a prosperous people, because I've been in countries that have very prosperous economies, and Ethiopia is one of them, but they have extreme amount of poverty as well. So I welcome a prosperous economy for Nanaimo. I welcome a higher living wage for the people who work in this province and in this city. Guaranteed minimum incomes, raising of the welfare rates so people don't live in poverty. So all of those things together make a prosperous economy. So that's what I think we should be striving for here, and I welcome the conversations on that. Thank you.
Not seeing any more speakers. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Help if I put my speaker on. So this is, again, a reminder of the process that we're taking with these GPCs. So we're right now on March 28th with Empowered, Healthy and Prosperous, and taking the motions and feedback from that to channel through to you for May 9th. And then our next GPC with you is on April 11th, where we'll be looking at land use and neighborhoods. So that will be a pretty important piece, given that the city plan is our land use plan. And so just a reminder for the community that we are aiming for May 30th for the first and second reading of a revised draft of the city plan. And then just to give you a bit of sense of timeline, where we're at is a reminder that tomorrow we have a public open house at Bevan on March 29th from 3 to 8. And so we hope community members who are watching and who feel comfortable coming out in person will join us for a traditional style open house. There will be, because the vaccine mandate is still on until April 1st, I believe, or is it April 8th? We'll be requiring vaccine passports for this. However, we do hope that we get good attendance, and for those who aren't able to attend, they have the surveys and other means of participating and directly contacting us. And then a reminder that we're aiming for more public engagement through the survey, which ends on April 8th, and really encouraging as many people as possible to do that. And for council, we're coming back to you again on April 11th with that GPC on land use and neighborhoods. So I don't know if you've got any questions about this, but this is the timeline that we're working on right now, and we hope we see as many of you as possible tomorrow.
Councillor Hemmens.
Thank you, Chair. Not a timeline question, but visuals. Are these our final visuals in city plan? And the reason I ask is they're not all Nanaimo. And I'm curious if we can make them all Nanaimo.
Yeah, so through the chair, these visuals, just so you know, Nanaimo First Nation are looking at some of the draft visuals to see if they might want to submit others, and others we did as placeholders. We thought it was better to give you a properly formatted document than to give you one that looked like a Word document, so you could see what the general format is. But yes, the intention is to use Nanaimo specific, and also with our Indigenous ones that they're vetted by the nation, because we put them in there in the absence of having other alternatives. So thank you. And if you have any personal pictures you'd like to contribute as alternatives to the ones that we've got, please feel free to do so.
Not seeing any more speakers. Pardon? Yes, I was just going to go there. Anything for question period?
Chair, there's no one here for question period.
Thank you. Motion to adjourn, Councillor Martman, seconded Councillor Hemmens. All in favor? Motion carries. Thank you, everybody.